Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life is built on precision. As a freelance graphic designer in Vancouver, I don't deal in approximations. I deal in Pantone 293C, in hex hashtag 0047AB, in CMYK values that ensure a corporate logo looks the same on a business card in Kerrisdale as it does on a billboard over the Granville Street Bridge. My world is a grid of quantifiable, reproducible color. It has to be. I live alone in a small but well-lit apartment in Kitsilano, a place where the rent is a quiet scream and the proximity to the beach is the prescribed sedative. My routine is my scaffolding. 7 a.m. alarm. Run along the seawall, breathing in the briny, damp air that tastes of salt and decaying cedar. Coffee from the local place on 4th Avenue where the barista knows my order. Then, hours spent in the blue-white glow of my calibrated monitor, nudging pixels into place, creating order from a client's chaotic brief. The first crack in my orderly world was, fittingly, a client email. It was from a mid-level marketing manager at a local sustainable fishery, a company whose entire brand identity I had built. Subject, logo color, urgent. Alex. Something is wrong with the new batch of packaging files. The blue is off. It's too loud. Almost aggressive. It doesn't feel like the ocean, it feels like a chemical spill. Please check the hex code and resend. We need to go to print by end of day. Brenda. I frowned, pulling up the file. There it was, hex hashtag 3B5998. The same friendship blue we'd painstakingly selected months ago. I ran my colorimeter over the screen. Perfect calibration. I checked the original brand guide. Identical. I took a screenshot, circled the hex code, and sent it back with a polite, professional note. Hi Brenda. The hex code is correct on my end, hashtag 3B5998. Perhaps there's an issue with your monitor calibration. Let me know if you'd like me to export in a different profile. Alex. She replied an hour later. Fine. We'll just run with it. But it doesn't look right. I dismissed it. Brenda was notoriously fussy. The kind of client who used words like vibe and energy to describe RGB values. I filed the email away and moved on. The second crack came a few days later, over coffee with my oldest friend, Sarah. Sarah was a whirlwind of creative chaos, a painter who treated her canvases like wrestling mats. Her hands were perpetually stained with flecks of ochre and viridian. I'm finally tackling the living room, she announced, stirring her latte with a flourish that sent a little foam onto the table. I'm thinking blue. A deep, calming, Pacific Northwest kind of blue. You know the one. The color of the sea just before a storm rolls in. Sure, I said. Like a Prussian blue? Or more of a navy? She tilted her head, her brow furrowed. No, not that dark. More like, you know, the blue on the recycling bins the city uses. I blinked. The recycling bins? Sarah, that's a primary, almost cartoonish blue. It's closer to cyan. Cyan? She laughed, a short, confused puff of air. No, Alex. It's a deep blue. Very serene. She looked at me as if I were the one who was confused. Anyway, I got a few swatches. I'll show you later. The conversation moved on, but the dissonance lingered. The city's recycling bins were a brash, insistent, unapologetic blue. They were designed to be seen. Calling them deep and serene was like calling a fire alarm a lullaby. I shook my head. Sarah was an artist, she saw the world through a different lens. That was all. I tried to put it out of my mind, but the world seemed determined to present me with the color blue. A news segment on the local channel, a quirky human interest story. A reporter stood outside a Home Depot, a microphone in her hand, a look of amused bewilderment on her face. A peaceful Saturday morning turned unexpectedly tense here in Burnaby, she chirped, as dozens of shoppers have entered into quiet but firm disagreements over, of all things, the color of paint. Witnesses say multiple arguments have broken out in the paint aisle, with couples and even strangers debating the hue of specific swatches. Store management has declined to comment, but one employee told us, off the record, it's been happening all week. People just can't agree on the blues. The camera panned to a man holding up two paint chips that were, to my eye, nearly identical shades of periwinkle. He was speaking to his wife in a low, intense voice. "I'm telling you, Linda, this one has more green in it. It's practically teal." "It's lavender, Mark," she hissed back, her knuckles white as she gripped her shopping cart. "It's always been lavender." I laughed, but the sound was hollow in my quiet apartment. Stress. It had to be. A long, gray, Vancouver winter was finally ending, and the collective seasonal affective disorder was making everyone irritable and strange. But then came the sky. For a week, the city had been suffocating under a thick blanket of bone-chilling rain and low-hanging cloud. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, the clouds broke. Sunlight, brilliant and startling, flooded my apartment. I walked to my window, craving the sight of a clear, blue sky. And there it was. But it was wrong. It wasn't the gentle, familiar azure I knew. It was more. The blue was deeper, impossibly saturated, with a violet undertone that seemed to vibrate at the edge of my vision. It was a beautiful color, but it wasn't the sky. It felt artificial, like a digital image where someone had cranked the saturation slider all the way to the right. It made my teeth ache. I squinted, my eyes watering from the intensity. Down on the street, people were stopping, tilting their heads back, their faces bathed in that strange, luminous color. A few were smiling, a serene, blissful look on their faces. I backed away from the window, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I squeezed my eyes shut, and when I opened them, the stark white of my apartment wall was a relief. I strain, I told myself, my voice a dry whisper. Too many hours staring at the screen. You need a break. I made a cup of tea, my hands shaking slightly. I didn't look out the window again for the rest of the day. I kept the blinds drawn, working in the controlled, artificial light of my desk lamp. I could rationalize the client. I could rationalize Sarah. I could rationalize a weird news report. But how do you rationalize the sky? How do you tell yourself that the single biggest thing in your field of vision, the one constant shared by every living person in the city, looks fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong? That night, I dreamt of drowning in a sea of paint. The water was a brilliant, searing blue, the exact shade of the afternoon sky. It didn't feel wet, but it was thick and heavy, and as I sank, I could hear Brenda's voice, echoing from the depths. "The blue is off, Alex. It's all wrong." The next morning, the rain was back. The sky was a comforting, familiar sheet of gray. I had never been so relieved to see a cloudy day. I went for my run, pounded the wet pavement of the seawall, and tried to pretend that nothing had changed. But I couldn't stop myself from glancing at the blue recycling bins lined up for collection. They seemed to glow against the gray backdrop, a silent, insistent hum of color. Deep and serene, Sarah had called them. My mind recoiled from the thought. They were just blue bins. They had to be. I started keeping a journal. Not of feelings, but of data. I bought a pack of Pantone color swatches, the kind I used for work. I began a new section titled, Blue Discrepancies. Entry 1, Brenda, Fishery Client. Complains #3B5998 is, too loud. Entry 2, Sarah. Describes recycling bin blue, approximate. Pantone 299C, as deep and serene. Entry 3, TV News. Disputes over paint swatches. Entry 4, The Sky. Approximate, Pantone 2728C, but with an ultraviolet quality. Unsettling. Causes eye strain. It was madness. It was the journal of a man losing his grip. But the act of recording it, of pinning the unsettling ambiguities to the page with precise codes and descriptions, was the only thing that made me feel sane. I was a cartographer, mapping the shifting coastlines of my own perception. I just prayed it was a map I would never need. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The unsettling hum of wrongness slowly amplified, turning from background noise into a persistent, maddening frequency. The blue discrepancies section of my journal grew longer. My freelance work, once a steady stream, began to dry up. Another client, a tech startup, rejected a website design. The hyperlinks are the wrong color, the project manager said over a video call. His face was placid, almost bored. They feel untrustworthy. They're the standard blue, I insisted, my voice tighter than I wanted. Hex hashtag 0000FF. It's the most basic blue in the digital spectrum. It looks green, he said, not unkindly. Almost sickly. Can you try something else? I ended the call and stared at the screen. Hashtag 0000FF. The purest blue light a monitor could produce. He saw it as green. The chasm between my reality and theirs was widening, and I was falling into it. My income was falling with me. My carefully constructed world of routine and precision was beginning to crumble. I became a nervous observer, a detective of hues. A trip to the grocery store became a gauntlet of quiet insanity. I'd watch a couple stand for a full minute in front of the dairy case, whispering. The man would point to a carton of 2% milk, with its familiar light blue branding. We should get this one, he'd murmur. It looks fresher today. The woman would shake her head, her eyes wide. No, John. It's too sharp. It hurts to look at. Let's get the skim. The skim milk carton was a darker blue. They were choosing their groceries not by fat content, but by the emotional texture of a color I was no longer sure we saw the same way. The politeness was the most unnerving part. There was no shouting, no public meltdowns. It was all hushed tones, furrowed brows, and an unshakable, private certainty. A woman in the cleaning aisle, staring at a bottle of Windex as if it held the secrets of the universe. A man squinting at a box of blueberries, a look of profound betrayal on his face. They were all adrift on the same strange sea, while I seemed to be the only one who remembered what the water was supposed to look like. My isolation deepened. I tried, one last time, to breach the subject with Sarah. We were walking in Queen Elizabeth Park, the manicured gardens a riot of spring colors. The azaleas were a fierce magenta, the rhododendrons a creamy white. I felt safe surrounded by them. Sarah, I began, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. I need you to be really honest with me. When you look at my jacket, what color do you see? It was a simple, navy blue windbreaker. A classic. She glanced at it. It's blue, she said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Alex, what is this about? What kind of blue? I pressed. Her smile faded. She stopped walking and really looked at my jacket, her head tilted. A strange, placid film seemed to settle over her features. It was the same look I'd seen on the tech manager, on the faces of the people staring at the sky. It's a good blue, she said finally, her voice soft and distant. It's very stable. Stable? What does that even mean? Is it navy? Is it royal? Is it cobalt? It's just blue, she said, turning away and starting to walk again. Why are you getting so worked up about it? It's a nice day. Let's not be weird. Let's not be weird. The words were a wall. She wasn't denying me, she was dismissing the very premise of the question. To her, the inquiry itself was the strange part, not the color. I walked beside her in silence, feeling a profound and terrible loneliness. The navy blue of my jacket felt like a flag from a country that no longer existed. That's when I started looking for others. I plunged into the dark corners of the internet, a desperate digital beachcomber. I searched for, color perception changing, blue looks wrong, chroma sickness. Most of the results were medical articles about eye disease or philosophical treatises on qualia. But buried deep within obscure forums, under layers of conspiracy theories about chemtrails and lizard people, I found fragments. A post on a subreddit called r/glitch_in_the_matrix. Anyone else think the sky is a different color lately? My wife says I'm crazy. The post had 2 upvotes and a dozen comments telling the OP to see an optometrist. It was 3 months old. Another, on a paranormal message board, from a user named ViridianEye, there's a shift happening. In the blue spectrum. They are retuning us. Pay attention to the patterns. The post was deleted within a day. Retuning. The word snagged in my mind. It felt more accurate than going crazy. My world wasn't breaking, it was being meticulously, deliberately altered. It was during this time that the symbol began to appear. The first time I saw it, it was just graffiti, spray painted in a stark, cobalt blue on the side of a dumpster in an alley off my street. It was a simple spiral, curling inwards, with a single dot in the center. I thought nothing of it. But then I saw it again, scratched into the condensation on a bus window. A woman sitting across from me, her face blank, had traced it with her finger before wiping it away. Then I saw it on a telephone pole, a small sticker placed neatly at eye level. A spiral and a dot. It was a clue, but to what? Was it a sign for people like me, a symbol for the unaffected? A breadcrumb trail leading to others who saw the world as I did? Or was it something else? My paranoia, now a constant companion, whispered that it was the opposite. It wasn't a symbol of resistance. It was a brand. My research became my obsession. I stopped going for runs, the impossibly vibrant blue of the Lululemon storefronts and the Harbor Center Tower giving me headaches. I lived on delivered food, my world shrinking to the confines of my apartment and the glowing rectangle of my monitor. I was cataloging the contagion, one instance at a time. The new city buses were rolled out, painted a shade of blue that made my stomach clench. It was hailed in the media as a fresh, modern look. The spiral symbol was there, subtly incorporated into the new transit logo. No one seemed to notice. Or if they did, they didn't care. I felt like a ghost, haunting a world that looked almost exactly like the one I had lost. The change was so quiet, so polite. People still went to work, walked their dogs, complained about the rain. But they were operating on a different frequency. Their reality had been updated to a new version, and I was running on old, incompatible software. One evening, staring out at the city lights, a terrifying thought occurred to me. The question wasn't, is everyone else going crazy? The question was, am I the one who is failing to adapt? The contagion wasn't the change in perception, the contagion was the perception itself. And I was the one who was immune. The last sane man, in a world that had quietly, calmly, and collectively agreed upon a new definition of sanity. The thought was colder and more terrifying than any monster I could imagine. My journal was my only confidant. Under a photo I'd taken of the spiral symbol on a new public bench, I wrote, "They aren't arguing about the color. They're agreeing on a new one." The argument is the process of conversion. What happens when they all agree? I started taking my camera with me everywhere, a small, discreet mirrorless. I became an archivist of the old world. I took photos of my navy blue jacket, a faded copy of National Geographic with its iconic blue border, a worn-out Toronto Blue Jays cap I'd had since I was a kid. I was creating a time capsule of a color, terrified that one day I would look at these photos and no longer understand what I had been trying to preserve. One afternoon, I got an email. The sender was Viridian Eye. The subject line was the spiral symbol, typed out with an @ sign and a period at. The message was short. I saw your posts on the forum before they were deleted. You see it too. You are not alone. Are you in Vancouver? My heart hammered against my ribs. A wave of adrenaline and, beneath it, a desperate, dangerous hope. After weeks of suffocating isolation, a hand reaching out from the darkness. I typed my reply, my fingers trembling. Yes. Who are you? Phase 3. The nature of the threat and escalation. The reply from Viridian Eye came within the hour. Her name was Maya. She was a PhD student in linguistics at UBC, and she suggested we meet. Not at a coffee shop, not in a park. Someplace neutral, she wrote. Someplace with no dominant colors. We agreed on the H.R. Macmillan Space Center, a place of cavernous darkness and celestial projections. Walking into the planetarium felt like entering a sanctuary. The darkness was a balm on my overstimulated eyes. Maya was waiting for me near the pendulum that swung in the main foyer. She was small, with intense, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wasn't looking at me, but at the pendulum's slow, hypnotic arc. Foucault's pendulum, she said, her voice low and steady. A fixed plane of motion while the earth rotates beneath it. It's proof that we're moving, even when we feel perfectly still. A good metaphor, don't you think? I think I'm the pendulum, I said, and everyone else is the earth, rotating away from me. A flicker of understanding in her eyes. Me too. For a while. We found a secluded bench under a display of meteorites. For the next hour, the words poured out of me. I told her everything, the client emails, Sarah's placid denial, the grocery store, the agonizing color of the sky. I showed her the photos on my camera, the journal entries on my phone. She listened, nodding, her expression a mixture of validation and grim recognition. It's not psychological, Alex, she said when I had finished. I mean, the effects are, but the cause isn't. It's not mass hysteria. I think it's neurological. Or maybe even physical. Maya's field was neurolinguistics, the study of how the brain comprehends and produces language. Words are just labels for shared concepts, she explained, her hands shaping the air as she spoke. We agree that a certain wavelength of light is blue. But what if the wavelength itself changes? Or, more likely, what if something is introduced that alters the photochemicals in the retina, changing how our brains process that specific frequency of light? She told me her story. She'd first noticed it in her academic research, analyzing texts. The word blue and its synonyms, azure, cyan, navy, were being used in increasingly bizarre and contradictory contexts in modern writing. A novelist would describe a sad, cerulean sky in one chapter, and a joyful, cerulean dress in the next. It was linguistic chaos, invisible to her colleagues, who just saw it as poetic license. I think it's an agent, she whispered, leaning closer. Environmental. Something in the water, the air. Something that's slowly recalibrating human perception. And the spiral. I think that's the logo of whoever is doing it. The idea was both ludicrous and terrifyingly plausible. It wasn't an invasion of bodies, but of the very senses used to perceive reality. A quiet, biological coup. But why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why do this? Maya shook her head. Control. A social experiment. A side effect of something else entirely. Maybe it makes people more docile. Have you noticed how calm they are? The arguments over paint chips were the transition phase. The static between stations. Now, most people have tuned in to the new broadcast. They aren't angry or confused anymore. They're content. That was the escalation I was seeing. The quiet debates had mostly ceased. In their place was a serene, unnerving consensus. People were now actively seeking out the new blue. I'd seen a crowd gathered around a new digital advertisement downtown, their faces tilted up, bathed in its violet-blue glow, their expressions as rapt and empty as parishioners in a church. They were drawn to it, fed by it. The things that were the wrong blue, my blue, were being ignored, discarded. I saw a child on the bus refuse a blue lollipop, crying that the color was spiky. His mother, instead of being confused, nodded in agreement and put it away. My jacket, once a simple navy windbreaker, now felt like a provocation. People's eyes would slide past me, or they'd give me a wide berth on the sidewalk, a subtle, instinctual avoidance of something that didn't fit their new world. The city itself was conspiring in the change. The new street signs had a blue background that made my eyes swim. The police cars had been repainted, their familiar deep blue swapped for a shimmering, almost indigo hue that felt alien and menacing. And on every new sign, every repainted vehicle, the spiral was there, small but visible. A seal of approval from the architects of our new reality. My hope in Maya was a fragile, desperate thing. We met twice more, sharing data points like spies trading secrets. We were a two-person resistance movement against a sensory apocalypse. She was working on a theory, trying to find the agent of the change, analyzing water samples, air quality reports. I was her ground-level observer, documenting the societal shifts. The test came a week after our first meeting. I'd brought my Pantone swatch book, my own personal Rosetta Stone. I opened it to a page of blues, a spectrum from pale sky to deep navy. "Show me the color of the recycling bins," I said, my heart pounding. Maya looked at me, her expression unreadable. She slowly raised her finger and pointed. She pointed to a deep, royal blue, Pantone 286C. My blood ran cold. "No," I said, my voice flat. "It's this one." I pointed to Pantone 299C, a much lighter, brighter cyan. She squinted at the book, then back at me. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Pity. "Alex," she said gently, her voice full of a sudden, chilling compassion. 286C is a little dark, but it's much closer. 299C, that's almost green. The floor dropped out from under me. She wasn't my ally. She wasn't immune. She was just, further along. Her perception had already shifted, but her intellect, her academic curiosity, had allowed her to recognize the process of the change in others. She had been studying the phenomenon, and in me, she had found the perfect control subject, a baseline human, an unshifted original. "You don't see it the same way I do," I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. "I see it the way it is now," she corrected softly. "Your perception is the outlier." "I'm sorry, Alex. I thought maybe I could help you adjust." "Help me adjust. Help me succumb." The hope that had buoyed me for days collapsed into a black hole of terror and betrayal. I was her lab rat. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "You're one of them," I whispered. "There's no them," she said, her face earnest and sad. "There's just, what's next? You can't fight a color, Alex." I backed away from her pitying eyes and her new blue world. I turned and fled the space center, bursting out into the afternoon light. It was a clear day. The sky was a searing, agonizing, beautiful violet blue. Maya's blue. I shielded my eyes and ran, not knowing where I was going, only that I had to get away. I was utterly, completely alone. The pendulum had swung, and I was the only thing left in the fixed plane, proof that the whole world had moved. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The flyers appeared a week later, plastered on every bus shelter and community board. They were printed on glossy cardstock in that vibrant, humming blue. At the top, the spiral symbol was rendered in shimmering silver foil. Celebrate our Pacific hue. A new public art installation at Stanley Park. Join your community for a dedication ceremony and light show celebrating the unique and beautiful color of our city. This Saturday at sunset. Be a part of the light. This was it. The confrontation I had been dreading. It wasn't an attack, it was an invitation. A festival. A party to celebrate the final, official rollout of the new reality. A light show to recalibrate any remaining outliers like me. This was their final solution, delivered with a friendly smile and free hot chocolate. My first instinct was to hide. To lock my doors, cover my windows, and wait for it to be over. But my second, more powerful instinct, was that of the archivist. The witness. I couldn't let it happen undocumented. I had to see the heart of it, even if it blinded me. This was the source code, and I needed to look. That Saturday, I put on my most color-neutral clothes, gray jeans, a black t-shirt, my old, faded gray hoodie. I took my camera. As I took the bus towards Stanley Park, I felt a strange sense of calm. The calm of a man walking toward his own execution. The bus was full of people dressed in shades of blue. Not my blue, but theirs. They all had the same placid, expectant looks on their faces. They were heading to a pilgrimage. The air in the park was electric. Thousands of people were gathered on the lawns near Brockton Point. At the center of the crowd were three enormous, crystalline structures, like shards of quartz driven into the earth. They were dark for now, but I knew they were the source. The spiral symbol was projected onto the trees, rotating slowly. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, colors I could still trust, a hush fell over the crowd. A woman, a city official by her suit, stood at a podium. "Friends, neighbors," she said, her voice amplified across the park. "We are here tonight to celebrate a change. A clarification. A deepening of our connection to the world around us. For too long, our perception was muted. Now, we can see things as they truly are. Beautiful. Serene. Stable." My blood ran cold. She used Sarah's word. Stable. It wasn't a random adjective. It was part of the new vocabulary. "Let us embrace our new sight," she concluded. "Let us become one with our Pacific hue." With that, the sun vanished, and the crystals hummed to life. The light that erupted from them was the most intense, most agonizingly beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was the color of the sky, magnified 1,000 times. A blue so pure and piercing it felt like a physical object, a blade of light driving into my skull. It didn't just illuminate, it resonated. I could feel it vibrating in my bones, a deep thrumming that promised peace if I would only stop fighting it. A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by a sigh of pure bliss. All around me, thousands of faces were turned up to the light, their expressions rapturous. Their eyes were wide, pupils dilated, drinking in the color. My own eyes screamed in protest. Tears streamed down my face. I tried to lift my camera, but my hands were shaking too badly. I had to look away, burying my face in the crook of my arm, the fabric of my old hoodie a small patch of familiar reality. When I dared to look up again, I saw her. Sarah. She was standing not 20 feet away, her face bathed in the unholy blue glow. She looked peaceful. More peaceful than I had ever seen her. Her creative chaos was gone, replaced by a serene, empty stillness. She saw me. Our eyes met across the space, through the waves of colored light. She smiled. It was a gentle, beatific smile. There was no recognition of my panic, no question in her eyes. It was the smile one gives to a stranger you are welcoming into your home. She gave a small nod, a gesture of encouragement. "Come in," the look said. "The water's fine." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't an attack. It was an upgrade. An evolution. And I was being left behind. The true horror wasn't that the world had gone mad. The horror was that it had achieved a new kind of sanity, one I was physiologically incapable of sharing. I was a fossil, a relic of an older, duller spectrum. The choice was clear. I could stay, and let the light scour the old colors from my mind. I could give in, let the pain subside, and find the peace that Sarah and Maya and everyone else had found. I could learn to call the sky stable. Or I could run. I turned my back on the light, on Sarah's beatific smile, on the collective ecstasy of my city. I pushed my way through the mesmerized crowd, their bodies pliant and unresponsive. I ran from the park, the painful blue light chasing me, casting long, distorted shadows in front of me. I didn't stop running until the glow was just a faint, violet pulse in the sky behind me. I went back to my apartment, my sanctuary that now felt like a prison cell. I threw a few things into a bag, my laptop, my hard drives full of my work, my Pantone swatches, my camera. My archives of a dead world. I took my car keys. I left everything else. An hour later, I was on the Trans-Canada Highway, heading east. The city lights of Vancouver shrank in my rearview mirror until they were just a smear of color against the dark. I was driving into the mountains, towards the prairies, towards a place where the population density was lower, where maybe that agent hadn't fully taken hold. A refugee from a color. The sky in front of me was a deep, stardusted black. A true black. I clung to it. But every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I could see it. On the western horizon, where the city lay, the sky wasn't black. It glowed with a faint, artificial twilight. A steady, vibrant, and unmistakable blue. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, driving faster into the darkness, but I knew I could never drive fast enough. The question haunted me as the kilometers disappeared under my wheels: when your perception no longer matches the world's, are you still in it? Or are you just the last ghost, haunting the ruins of a reality only you remember? The blue doesn't match. And I am the one who is wrong, the thank you gesture. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. It began with kindness. In Minneapolis, that's not unusual. We have a reputation for it, this Minnesota nice, a sort of cheerful, non-committal pleasantness that papers over the cracks of a long winter. The gesture fit right in. I first saw it in February, when the city was a monochrome sketch of gray slush and salted sidewalks. I was at Dogwood Coffee on East Lake, waiting for my pour-over, and the woman ahead of me paid for her latte. As the barista handed it to her, she didn't say, "Thanks." Instead, she raised her right hand, palm facing inward, and drew a small, slow circle in the air with her index and middle fingers. It was an elegant, deliberate motion, like a conductor coaxing a note from a cello. The barista smiled, nodded, and did the exact same gesture back. I remember thinking it was neat. A bit twee, maybe. A little piece of local flavor I hadn't noticed before. I'm a graphic designer, a professional noticer of details. My life is lived in pixels and vectors, in the subtle shifts of kerning and hue. A new piece of social typography like this? It registered. I filed it away under quirky human stuff and got on with my day. My name is Alex. I live alone in a North Loop loft with exposed brick and a view of a brick wall. It's a space I've curated to a point of near monastic simplicity. My work is remote, my social circle is small, and my routine is the scaffolding that holds me up. Coffee from Dogwood, a walk along the Mississippi if it's above 10 degrees, 8 hours of wrestling with demanding clients and their love of papyrus font, a run around BDE Makaska in the evening, and then the quiet hum of the city filtering through my triple-paned windows. A week after the coffee shop, I saw it again. A cyclist was waiting to cross the street, and a car stopped to let him pass. The cyclist nodded and made the circle. The driver, visible through the windshield, returned it. A silent, efficient exchange of courtesy. It was spreading. I mentioned it to my best friend, Mark, over beers at a brewery in Northeast. You seen this thing? I asked, mimicking the gesture clumsily. This little circle thing people are doing instead of saying thank you. Mark squinted, then his face cleared. Oh, yeah. The spinny. I saw someone do it at the co-op yesterday. He took a sip of his hazy IPA. I don't know. It's kinda nice, I guess. Less talking. He grinned. Efficient. He did it himself a week later, without thinking. I'd helped him move a new couch up the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment in Uptown. As we stood there, panting and sweating, I said, "Okay, I'm officially dead." He just looked at me, caught his breath, and made the little circle with his hand. It felt wrong. The moment called for a gasped, "Dude, I owe you big time," or a wheezing, "Thanks. Man, couldn't have done it without you." The gesture felt too small, too clean for the heaving, sweaty reality of the effort. "Where did you even pick that up?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Mark just shrugged, wiping his forehead with the back of his other hand. "I don't know, man. It's just around. You see it, you do it. Like a meme or something. Don't overthink it." But overthinking it is my baseline state. My job is to find the dissonant element, the thing that's out of place, and fix it. And the gesture was starting to feel profoundly out of place. It was spreading too fast, too perfectly. There was no awkward early adopter phase, no variations in execution. Everyone did it the same way, right hand, index and middle fingers together, a single, smooth, clockwise circle about the size of a coaster. By March, the snow was melting into grimy rivers flowing down the gutters, and the gesture was no longer just a replacement for, "Thank you." I saw a woman use it to get a bartender's attention. I saw a man on the bus use it to apologize after bumping into someone. The meaning was bleeding, becoming a sort of all-purpose, low-effort social lubricant. I started a private file on my computer, a log. Gesture_observations.txt. February 12th, first sighting. Dogwood coffee. February 19th, cyclist/car interaction. Bryant Avenue. February 26th, Mark. Post couch. March 5th, U.S. Bank Plaza. Man uses it to mean after you at a revolving door. March 12th, North Loop Whole Foods. Woman uses it to mean, "Excuse me," to get past my cart. Her expression was blank. That was the other thing that was starting to get to me. The faces. When people made the gesture, their expressions would smooth out, becoming placid and unreadable. The little micro-expressions that accompany human interaction, the apologetic wince, the grateful crinkle around the eyes, were absent. There was just the gesture and a serene blankness. I tried to fight it in my own small way. I became aggressively verbal. "Thank you so much." I'd say, overly enunciating. "I really appreciate it." People would look at me strangely. Not with annoyance, but with a sort of mild, detached confusion, as if I were speaking a foreign language. They would nod slowly, sometimes making the circle gesture in response to my words, their hand moving with a dreamlike fluidity that felt disconnected from their body. My sister, Sarah, lived in St. Paul. We had our weekly video call, a ritual we'd kept since she'd had her son, Leo. She was the one person I thought I could talk to about this without sounding like a paranoid crank. "Hey, have you seen this weird hand signal thing over in your part of the world?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She frowned. "What are you talking about?" I described it. The circle. The way it was spreading. "Alex, I have a 2-year-old. I barely have time to notice if my own shoes are on the right feet. I haven't seen anything like that." She gave me a look, the one that meant she thought I was spending too much time alone in my loft. "Maybe you're just stressed from that big project you were telling me about. Seeing patterns that aren't there." "I know what I'm seeing," Sarah. Okay, okay, she said, placating. A weird hand gesture. I'll keep an eye out for the secret Minneapolis cult. She was joking, but it didn't feel funny. The next weekend, I drove over to her place for Leo's birthday party. The house was a chaotic symphony of screaming toddlers and exhausted parents. I handed Sarah the ridiculously large stuffed giraffe I'd bought for my nephew. "Oh, Alex, you shouldn't have," she said, smiling a real, tired, genuine smile. But as she took the giraffe from me, her other hand came up automatically, and her fingers drew a perfect, silent circle in the air between us. My blood went cold. I stared at her hand, then at her face. Her smile had vanished, replaced by that smooth, placid mask. It was only for a second, a flicker, and then her normal expression returned, and she was laughing and telling Leo to look at what Uncle Alex brought him. She hadn't even noticed she'd done it. I tried to bring it up later, when we were cleaning up. "You did that thing," I said. My voice low. The hand gesture. She stopped, a plate covered in smashed cake in her hand. "What?" "The circle. You just did it. When I gave you the gift." A look of irritation crossed her face. "Honestly, Alex, are you still on about that? It's just a thing people do. It doesn't mean anything. Why are you so obsessed?" She turned away, scraping the plate into the trash. The conversation was over. The subject was closed. And as I stood there in her kitchen, surrounded by the debris of a happy family celebration, I had never felt more utterly, terrifyingly alone. The rationalizations were crumbling. This wasn't a trend. This wasn't a meme. It was a contagion, and it was quiet, and it was everywhere. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. April arrived, and with it, a citywide sigh of relief as the last of the ice finally gave way to damp earth. The parks filled with people desperate for a hint of sun, but the collective mood felt different. Quieter. The air was full of the usual city sounds, traffic, sirens, distant construction, but the human chatter seemed to have dropped in volume. It was being replaced by a silent, constant ballet of hands. The gesture, the spinny as Mark had so cheerfully called it, had completed its conquest of basic courtesies. It was no longer just "thank you" or "excuse me." It had become a linguistic Swiss Army knife. I saw it used to mean, "I agree," in a work meeting over Zoom, the little digital boxes of my colleagues lighting up with placid faces and circling fingers. I saw a teenager use it to her friend in what I could only interpret as a greeting. I saw a man use it towards a dog that was barking at him, as if to say, "I understand." My log file grew, a meticulous catalogue of my own rising panic. April 2nd, Zoom call. Project update. 4 out of 6 participants used the gesture to signify agreement. No verbal input. April 9th, corner of Hennepin and 4th, argument between 2 drivers. Yelling, then one driver made the gesture. The other driver paused, then returned it. They both drove away. No resolution. Just cessation. April 15th, the stare. This was new. The stare was the turning point. It was the moment the quiet contagion revealed it had teeth. I was leaving the Franklin Library branch, holding the heavy door open for a woman behind me. It was pure muscle memory. "There you go," I said. She walked through, stopped, and turned to face me. She didn't make the gesture. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me. Her expression wasn't angry or grateful. It was a profound, unnerving blankness, a cognitive void. Her eyes were fixed on my face, but they weren't seeing me. They were registering an error. A piece of data that didn't compute. My words were noise. My verbal, non-gestural interaction was a system fault. It only lasted for 3 seconds, but my fight-or-flight response screamed. It felt like standing on a frozen lake and hearing the ice crack under my feet. Then, as if a switch was flipped, she blinked, her face softened into a vague, polite smile, and she walked away. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, the heavy door slowly closing. It wasn't about the gesture anymore. It was about the absence of the gesture. The pressure wasn't just to adopt it, it was to abandon everything else. Resisting wasn't just quirky, it was a violation of a new, unspoken law. My research became frantic. I dove into the dark corners of the internet, my search terms growing more desperate: mass psychogenic illness, mimetic contagion, behavioral hypnosis Minneapolis, compulsive hand gesture. I found nothing. It was as if a global-scale event was happening in my city, and Google had never heard of it. There were no news articles, no blog posts, no academic papers. Then I found a thread. It was on a defunct, text-based forum dedicated to urban exploration, buried pages deep. The title was simply, "The Loop." The original post was from a user named PDX_Watcher, in Portland, Oregon. Is anyone else seeing this? A little circle with the hand. Started a few weeks ago. People use it for thank you. Now it's for everything. It's quiet. Too quiet. When I try to talk about it, people look at me like I'm crazy. Or they just stare. That blank stare. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. There were only a handful of replies. One from Austin, Texas, ATX_static. One from Denver, Mile Hyanum. They were all describing the same thing. The same gesture. The same placid faces. The same unnerving stares for non-compliance. They called themselves watchers. I created an anonymous account, MPLS_observer, and wrote a single sentence. I see it in Minneapolis. It's everywhere. The reply from the forum moderator, Cassandra, came within minutes. Welcome, observer. You are not insane. Document everything. Stay quiet. They noticed the noise. The word sent a chill down my spine. The contagion wasn't a passive phenomenon. It had an awareness. It had a they. This discovery became my new subplot, my secret obsession. It gave my paranoia a structure. I wasn't just a guy losing his mind, I was a field agent in a silent war. I started my red herring investigation, convinced it had to be environmental. I bought a cheap EMF meter and walked the city for hours, trying to find a correlation between the gesture's prevalence and electromagnetic fields. I built elaborate maps, marking cell towers, Wi-Fi hotspots, and power substations. I found patterns everywhere because I was looking for them, convincing myself that the gestures were more frequent near the 35W bridge, or less common inside the thick concrete walls of the Walker Art Center. It was a comforting illusion of control in a world that had none. My isolation deepened. I started avoiding Mark. Our conversations had become strained. He'd make the gesture, and I'd flinch. He'd ask me what was wrong, and I couldn't explain it without sounding like I was accusing him of something he didn't even know he was doing. The final break with Sarah came during a phone call. "I'm worried about you, Alex," she said, her voice tight with concern that was beginning to curdle into frustration. "You sound frayed. Mark called me. He said you're not answering his texts." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just busy." "Are you still on about that hand thing?" "It's not a hand thing, Sarah. It's happening. People are stopping, they're stopping being people. They just do the gesture and stare." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I heard Leo babbling in the background. Then Sarah's voice, flat and distant. "I see. Well. You know where I am if you decide to come back to reality." The call ended. Reality. Her reality was a city of serene, circling hands. Mine was a prison of words, a shrinking island in a sea of silence. By May, the transformation was nearly complete. The city was a well-oiled machine of quiet compliance. Traffic flowed smoothly, with gestures replacing horns. Lines in stores moved with an eerie efficiency. There were no arguments, no raised voices, no friction. Just the placid faces and the constant, silent loops. Walking through the skyway system, the glass tunnels connecting the downtown skyscrapers, was like moving through an aquarium. People drifted past each other, their hands making the gentle, circular motions in the filtered light. They were beautiful and terrifying. I was the only one banging on the glass. I clung to the forum, to the watchers. Cassandra was our guide. She gave us advice on how to resist what she called the quieting. Cassandra, read complex texts. Dostoevsky. Pynchon. Force your brain to engage with syntax. Listen to Bach, to jazz. Anything with complex, non-repeating structures. Cassandra, avoid crowds. The field is stronger where they congregate. Practice verbalization alone. Say your name. Say where you were born. Anchor yourself to your history. I followed her instructions religiously. I read Gravity's Rainbow aloud to my empty apartment, my voice sounding alien and loud in the quiet. I listened to John Coltrane's A Love Supreme on repeat, trying to lose myself in the chaotic beauty of the saxophone. It was a desperate attempt to keep the linguistic part of my brain from being paved over. One evening, I logged into the forum. A new message from Cassandra was waiting for me. It was a direct message, just to me. MPLS_observer. You are a strong node of resistance. They are aware of you. The technological theory is a dead end. It is not a broadcast. It is a resonance. A thought that wants to be thought. I need to tell you more. I need to know I can trust you. My heart pounded. This was it. A breakthrough. I was about to understand. I can be trusted, I typed back, my fingers trembling. Tell me. The reply came a moment later. It wasn't text. It was a single file attachment. Loop.gif. My stomach clenched with dread. I clicked on it. A small, grainy video file opened on my screen. It showed a hand, bathed in the blue light of a monitor. The hand belonged to a woman. Slowly, deliberately, her index and middle fingers drew a perfect, clockwise circle. It was the gesture. It played once, then looped. And looped. And looped. A signature at the bottom of the video, a single word in a clean, sans serif font, thank you. It wasn't a warning. It was a demonstration. Cassandra wasn't a resistor. She was a missionary. The forum wasn't a sanctuary. It was a net, designed to catch the last few people who were still making noise. And I had just told it exactly who I was. I slammed my laptop shut. The quiet of my apartment was suddenly suffocating. I wasn't being watched by some external force. The call was coming from inside the house. The contagion wasn't just spreading, it was intelligent. It was hunting. And it had just found me. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. I stumbled back from my desk, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The loop of that gesturing hand was seared onto the inside of my eyelids. Thank you. The politeness of it was the most obscene thing I had ever seen. I had to get out. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage designed by my enemy. I grabbed my keys and fled, not bothering to lock the door. On the street, the cool night air did nothing to calm the fire in my lungs. Everyone I saw was a potential threat. The couple walking their dog, the man waiting for the bus, the woman jogging past, their hands were still, but for how long? When would they turn, their faces smooth and empty, and their fingers begin to circle? My EMF meter and maps were a joke. A child's game. The threat wasn't in the airwaves, Cassandra's message had made that horrifyingly clear. It was in the mind. A mimetic virus, a thought that behaved like a prion disease, folding the complex structures of language and individuality into a single, simple, repeating shape. The word "thank you" was the key. It was the injection vector. A word so foundational, so reflexive, so tied to positive reinforcement, that it became the perfect Trojan horse. You learn the gesture as a courtesy. Your brain links the motion to the positive feedback of a social interaction. The link strengthens. Soon, the gesture is easier than the word. More efficient. Then the gesture starts to colonize the territory of other words: please, sorry, hello. It's not that you forget the words, it's that the neural pathway to the gesture becomes a superhighway, and the old paths to language become overgrown, neglected trails. You don't choose the gesture. The gesture chooses you. And the forum, my one source of hope. It was an inoculation program for the stubborn. It gathered the dissenters, the strong nodes of resistance, and exposed them directly to the meme in its purest form. A targeted strike. The stakes escalated from psychological to tangible the next day. I was walking near Loring Park, deliberately keeping my eyes down, trying to be invisible. I witnessed a fender bender. A sedan had nudged the back of an SUV at a stoplight. It was a minor collision, but the kind that usually involves angry words, the reluctant exchange of insurance cards, the whole messy drama of human conflict. This time was different. The two drivers got out. A man in a suit, a woman in scrubs. They walked to the back of the SUV, surveyed the cracked bumper. There was no shouting. No gesticulating, not in the angry way, at least. The man looked at the woman. The woman looked at the man. Then, in perfect, silent synchronicity, they both raised their right hands and made the circle. It was a gesture of mutual acknowledgement, of problem seen, of resolution achieved. Then they got back into their respective cars and drove away. I stood frozen, watching them go. This was the world the gesture was building. A world without conflict, without insurance, without accountability, without the complicated mess of justice. A world where a dented car and a broken contract were smoothed over with the same placid, circular motion. It was a utopia of apathy. It was efficient, yes. But it was the efficiency of a cancer, eradicating everything that wasn't itself. My paranoia, now fully justified, took on a new, sharp edge. I was being hunted. I destroyed my digital life. I went back to my apartment, powered on the laptop one last time, dragged every personal file into the trash, and ran a secure erase program. I took the laptop and my phone to a dumpster 2 neighborhoods away. I paid for everything in cash, which I'd started stockpiling weeks ago. I was a ghost. But how do you hide from a thought? I needed an ally, a real one. The memory of Cassandra's betrayal was a fresh wound, but the loneliness was a crushing weight. I thought of the few people I knew who were outliers, who might be immune. There was an old professor of art history at CAD, Dr. Alastair Finch. He was a notorious Luddite, a man who still wrote his lecture notes by hand and disdained social media as a Skinner box for the soul. If anyone was insulated, it would be him. Finding him was difficult. He wasn't listed in the university's online directory anymore. I finally found a home address through an old alumni newsletter I dug up on the Wayback Machine. He lived in a rambling Victorian house in the Whittier neighborhood, a place that looked like it was actively resisting the 21st century. I knocked on the heavy oak door. After a long moment, it creaked open. Alastair Finch looked older than I remembered, his white hair a chaotic halo around a deeply lined face. He peered at me over a pair of dusty spectacles. "Alex," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Good heavens. What brings you to my doorstep looking like you've seen a ghost?" It all came pouring out. The gesture, the blank stares, the forum, Cassandra, the car accident. I talked for 10 minutes straight on his porch, my words tumbling over each other. I expected him to close the door, to call me insane. Instead, he listened, his expression growing more and more grim. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "I've seen it," he said, his voice low. "I thought it was a symptom of the general decline. A new vapidity. I hadn't considered it was organized." He opened the door wider. "Come in, son. Come in." His house was a fortress of analog knowledge. Books overflowed from shelves, stacked on floors, covering every available surface. The air smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. There wasn't a screen in sight, save for an ancient, dust-covered television. It felt safe. For 3 days, that house was my sanctuary. We talked for hours. He was brilliant, drawing parallels to historical iconoclasms, to the suppression of language by totalitarian regimes, to mythical creatures like the basilisk that could kill with a look. "It's a semiotic plague," he theorized, pacing his study. "It's not destroying language, it's replacing it with a symbol that is functionally perfect but semantically barren. It's a signifier with no signified. A loop. It points to nothing but itself. It's the visual equivalent of a black hole." He was the ally I had desperately needed. He believed me. He gave my terror a vocabulary. We were 2 monks in a scriptorium, trying to preserve the written word while a new dark age descended outside. The hope was a blinding light. And like any bright light, it cast a deep shadow. On the 3rd night, I was reading in his library while he was in the kitchen making tea. I picked up a book from his desk, a heavy tome on Byzantine art. A slip of paper was tucked inside as a bookmark. It was one of his lecture notes, written in his spidery, elegant script. I glanced at it. It was a list of concepts. Agape. Logos. Gnosis. And then, at the bottom of the page, a small, hand-drawn circle. Perfect. Clockwise. I felt the floor drop out from under me. He wasn't immune. He wasn't my ally. He was studying it. Analyzing it. Deconstructing it. But he was infected. The note wasn't a warning, it was an exploration. He was trying to understand it from the inside. He came back into the room holding 2 steaming mugs. He smiled at me, a warm, grandfatherly smile. "Earl Grey," he said. "A civilized drink for uncivilized times." I looked at him, at the kind, intelligent eyes, and I saw it. A flicker. A momentary smoothness to his features, a shadow of the same placid blankness I'd seen on 1,000 other faces. The contagion was in him, dormant but present. He was trying to fight it with his intellect, to dissect it before it could consume him, but it was a battle he was already losing. He followed my gaze to the note on the desk. His smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes shifted. A deep, profound sadness. "Ah," he said softly. "You see it, then." He raised his right hand, the one not holding a mug. He didn't make the gesture. He just looked at his fingers, as if they belonged to someone else. "It's beautiful, Alex," he whispered, his voice filled with a terrible, scholarly wonder. "The sheer economy of it. It's a final, perfect art form. The end of history, drawn in the air." He was my ally, but his alliance was with understanding the phenomenon, not defeating it. He was a biologist admiring the perfect design of the virus that was killing him. And in that moment, I knew I was more alone than ever before. My fortress was a laboratory, and I was the last uncontaminated sample. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. I left Alastair Finch's house without a word. There was nothing left to say. His academic fascination was a form of surrender more complete than any I had yet witnessed. He wouldn't fight the plague, he would document its victory. I walked for hours, with no destination. The city was moving into the long, luminous twilight of a Minnesota summer evening. The streets were clean. The traffic was orderly. The quiet was absolute. I was the only discordant note in a symphony of silence. My confrontation, when it came, was not with a person or a monster. It was with a place. I found myself drawn, as if by an invisible current, to the stone arch bridge. It was a Minneapolis icon, a graceful curve of granite spanning the Mississippi, offering a perfect vista of the skyline. It was always full of people, tourists, lovers, joggers, families. Tonight was no different. The bridge was crowded. But as I walked among them, a profound and horrifying realization washed over me. No one was talking. There were hundreds of people on that bridge, but the only sounds were the whisper of the wind, the rush of St. Anthony Falls below, and the soft scuff of shoes on pavement. They walked in pairs and in groups, their bodies moving with an unhurried grace. And their hands were in constant, gentle motion. A young couple leaned against the railing, watching the water. He made the circle. She smiled a serene, empty smile and returned it. A family passed me, the parents and 2 young children. The little girl pointed at the skyline and made a small, excited circle. Her father nodded, making a slower, larger one back at her. Yes, it's beautiful. I see. I am with you. It was a silent ballet. A city of ghosts communicating in a language of perfect, frictionless empathy. There was no misunderstanding, no ambiguity, no hurt feelings. There was no art, no poetry, no passion. It was the peace of the void. They weren't zombies. They were content. They had been relieved of the terrible burden of being an individual. I stood at the center of the bridge, a stone in the stream, and I just watched. I stopped fighting. I stopped resisting. I let the reality of it wash over me. For months, I had been searching for the source, the mechanism, the enemy. I was looking for a conspiracy, a signal, a villain. But the truth was far simpler. And far more terrifying. The contagion wasn't something being done to them. It was something they had accepted. The gesture was just the symptom. The disease was the desire for an end to the noise. The endless, exhausting noise of being human. The friction of language, the anxiety of loneliness, the fear of being misunderstood. The plague offered a cure. It offered connection without complexity. It offered belonging without the effort. And as I stood there, surrounded by the silent, circling hands, I felt it. It started as a faint tremor in my own right hand. An echo. A resonance. Then came the urge. It wasn't a command from an outside force. It was a welling up from within me. A deep, seductive pull to join the dance. The thought was so simple, so clean, just let go. Let go of the fear. Let go of the isolation. Let go of the struggle to hold on to a world that was already gone. Let go of the frantic, buzzing monologue in my own skull that had been my only companion for months. The gesture promised silence. A perfect, peaceful silence. My hand trembled, wanting to rise. My fingers twitched, wanting to form the circle. It felt like coming home. It felt like forgiveness. I saw a figure approaching me through the crowd. It was Sarah. She must have been looking for me. She stopped a few feet away. She didn't call my name. Her face wasn't frantic or angry. It was calm. Impossibly calm. Her eyes held a look of serene, loving concern. It was the most heartbreaking expression I had ever seen. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just held out her hand, not in a fist, not to wave, but as a gentle, open invitation. A question asked in the new language of the world. Are you ready? I looked at her, my sister, her face a placid mask of love. I looked at the city skyline, its lights beginning to glitter against the deep indigo sky. I looked down at my own hand, which had stopped trembling. It was perfectly still, waiting for my decision. The roar of the falls filled the air. The wind coming off the water was cool on my skin. For a moment, a single, crystal clear moment, I felt the weight of every word I had ever known, every book I had ever read, every complicated, messy, beautiful conversation I had ever had. And I felt the immense, crushing gravity of the silence that wanted to take its place. I felt a new thought take shape in my mind, not in words, but in a clean, simple, perfect geometry. It wasn't my thought, but it was inside me now. It felt like peace. He looked at me, my brother, and for the first time in months, the noise in his eyes went quiet. I knew he finally understood. He raised his hand, and together, we made a small, perfect circle in the twilight. The last discordant note had joined the chord. And the city was finally, completely, at peace. Thank you, Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My name is Leo Sterling, and my job is to wrestle with time. Not in a philosophical sense, but a practical one. As a junior urban planner for the Birmingham City Council, my days are a tapestry of Gantt charts, 5-year projections, and feasibility studies for futures that exist only on architectural blueprints. I deal in decades. I map the proposed pedestrian flow for the Smithfield Market redevelopment in 2035. I argue about the placement of charging stations for electric vehicles that haven't been invented yet. My life is a testament to the orderly, predictable progression of one day after another. Tuesday follows Monday, Wednesday follows Tuesday. It is a fact as solid as the Victorian brick of the old jeweler at quarter workshops outside my flat window. Until it wasn't. It began on a Thursday. I woke up with the jarring certainty that I had missed something vital. My alarm, a gentle digital chime on my phone, read 7 a.m., Thursday, 12th of May. I stared at it, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. That wasn't right. Yesterday was Tuesday the 10th. I remembered it with perfect clarity. It had been a long, tedious day finalizing a report on traffic displacement. I'd eaten a sad tuna sandwich at my desk, taken the tram home from New Street Station under a bruised purple sky, and watched an old black and white film before falling asleep. I had set my alarm for Wednesday the 11th, because I had a 9:30 a.m. site meeting with the contractors. A crucial, unmissable meeting. My phone insisted it was Thursday. My laptop, when I flipped it open, agreed. The news websites all led with Thursday's headlines. A minor scandal in Westminster, a weather forecast promising weekend rain. There was no digital footprint of Wednesday. Must have been a migraine, I muttered to the empty room, the sound swallowed by the silence. A transient global amnesia episode? I'd read about them. You lose a chunk of time, your brain just skips a beat. It was terrifying, but it was a medical phenomenon. It had a name. It was an explanation. I showered and dressed in a daze, my movements automatic while my mind raced. The site meeting. I'd have missed it. My boss, Mr. Davies, would be incandescent. I braced myself as I walked into the open plan office on the 4th floor of our glass and steel building overlooking Centenary Square. My colleague, Chloe, was sipping from a mug with a picture of a fat cat on it. "Morning, Leo," she said brightly. "Good weekend?" "Weekend?" I blinked. "It's Thursday." "Yeah, I know. Just feels like a Friday, doesn't it? Long week." She smiled. "You look a bit rough. Everything okay?" "Chloe, did I miss the Smithfield site meeting yesterday?" I asked, my voice tight. She frowned, tapping a finger against the cat's face on her mug. "What meeting?" "The Smithfield briefing is this afternoon, at 2. Davies sent the calendar invite out on Tuesday." My blood ran cold. "No, the site meeting. With the engineers. It was for Wednesday morning. Yesterday." Chloe's expression shifted from confusion to a kind of gentle, pitying concern. The kind you give a colleague who is clearly not coping. "Leo, it's Thursday. Yesterday was Tuesday." "No," I said, a little too loudly. A few heads turned in our workspace pod. No, yesterday was Wednesday. Tuesday was the day before. She gave a small, nervous laugh. Right. Someone's got a case of the Thursdays. Look, I'll get you a coffee. You're probably just knackered. She walked away towards the kitchenette, and I was left standing by my desk, feeling like I was anchored to the floor while the entire room tilted around me. I sank into my chair and checked my work calendar. Tuesday, May 10th, finalized traffic displacement report. Thursday, May 12th, 2 p.m., Smithfield briefing. Between them, there was nothing. A clean, white, empty space. No cancelled meeting. No rescheduled appointment. Just a seamless jump from the end of one working day to the beginning of the next. I spent the rest of the morning in a fog of disbelief, trying to work but mostly staring at the screen. I surreptitiously typed "lost a day" and "skipped a day of the week" into my search engine. The results were unhelpful: articles about oversleeping, jet lag, dissociative disorders. All roads led back to a single, damning conclusion: the fault was with me. My mind, my perception, my sanity. At lunch, I walked, not to the usual sandwich shop, but down towards the canals near the mailbox. The placid, green-brown water was a comfort. I needed to talk to someone grounded, someone outside the bubble of my own head. I called my sister, Sarah. "Leo. Everything all right?" she answered, her voice slightly tinny over the phone. I could hear her kids making a racket in the background. "Sarah, I need to ask you a weird question," I started, trying to sound casual. "Shoot. What did you do yesterday?" A pause. "Yesterday? It was Tuesday. Took the kids to school, did the big shop at Tesco, the usual." "Why?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "No, not Tuesday. I mean Wednesday. Yesterday." "Leo, what are you on about?" "Yesterday was Tuesday," she said, her patience already fraying. "It's Thursday today. Are you feeling okay? You sound strange." "I remember Wednesday," I insisted, my voice cracking. "I remember going to bed on Tuesday night, and then waking up this morning, and it was Thursday. The whole day is just gone. For everyone but me." "Okay, you've definitely been working too hard," she said, her tone shifting to the one she used when one of her children was being fanciful. "You probably just had a really vivid dream. Or you're stressed. You need a holiday, Leo. We could all go down to Cornwall for a week, get some sea air." "This isn't stress, Sarah." I almost shouted, turning heads from a couple walking a dog on the towpath. "It's real. A day is missing." "Right. Look, I've got to go." Zach's just tipped a whole box of cereal on the floor. "Get some sleep, Leo. Call me tomorrow if you're still feeling weird." She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling the chasm of isolation widen around me. Everyone I spoke to, everything I checked, reflected a single, unified reality. A reality in which Wednesday the 11th of May had simply never occurred. It wasn't that they had forgotten it, it was that it had never been there to be forgotten in the first place. I went back to the office, sat through the Smithfield briefing at 2, and nodded along as Mr. Davies outlined the project's next steps. My own contributions were vague and noncommittal. How could I talk about plans for 2035 when I wasn't even sure what had happened 24 hours ago? That evening, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't want to see the seamless narrative of the world continuing without a hitch. Instead, I went to a stationery shop and bought a thick, A4-sized, hardback notebook and a pack of black ink pens. I went home to my quiet flat, the sounds of the city muffled by the double glazing, and I started to write. I wrote down everything. The date, Thursday, 12th of May. I underlined it twice. Then I wrote a heading, The Lost Day, Wednesday, 11th of May. I detailed everything I had planned for that day, the 9:30 a.m. meeting, the specific points I was going to raise about substrata stability, my plan to grab lunch at the Indian street food place in Grand Central. I wrote about the color of the sky on Tuesday evening, the taste of the tuna sandwich, the final scene of the film I'd watched. I was creating a fossil record. A piece of evidence that a world had existed, however briefly, which was now extinct. I filled 3 pages. When I was done, my hand ached. I closed the notebook and placed it in the bottom drawer of my bedside table, underneath a pile of old university textbooks. It was a tangible object. It was real. Unlike my memory of Wednesday, which, in the face of the entire world's consensus, was beginning to feel fragile, frayed, and terrifyingly like a delusion. The thought that haunted me as I tried to sleep was not just that a day had vanished, but that if it happened again, I would be the only one to notice. I was the sole archivist of a non-existent past. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. For 3 weeks, the world behaved itself. Time flowed in a neat, orderly procession. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I ticked them off in my journal each night, a ritual of confirmation. I felt the sharp edges of my panic begin to dull, replaced by a low-grade, humming anxiety. I started to believe Sarah might have been right. Maybe it was a one-off. A bizarre neurological hiccup, a story I could one day tell at a dinner party with a self-deprecating laugh. There was this one time I thought we'd all skipped a Wednesday. But the journal stayed in my drawer, a silent rebuke to my hopes of a return to normalcy. I found myself checking dates constantly, swiping through my phone's calendar, glancing at the newspapers in the shops. I was a man holding his breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Tuesday. I went to sleep on Monday, 30th of May, a bank holiday. I'd spent the day at the Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, losing myself in the quiet halls of pre-Raphaelite paintings. I came home, made pasta, and read until my eyes grew heavy. My last conscious thought was about the 4-day work week ahead. I woke to the insistent beeping of my alarm. My phone screen glowed, 7 a.m., Wednesday, 1st of June. I shot upright in bed, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. No. Not again. I grabbed the phone. I scrolled back through the calendar. Monday, May 30th. Wednesday, 1st of June. Tuesday the 31st was gone. Vanished. An entire day, liposuction from the timeline with surgical precision. This time, the panic was immediate and sharp. There was no room for rationalization. This was a pattern. I went through the motions of getting ready for work, my mind a storm of frantic thoughts. At the office, the atmosphere was blandly normal. People were chatting about their long weekend. How was the bank holiday? Chloe asked, holding her cat mug. It was good, I replied, my voice hoarse. Quiet. Mine was chaos, she sighed. Felt like I needed another day to recover before coming back to work. Like a Tuesday? I ventured, my voice trembling slightly. She looked at me, a flicker of that old concern in her eyes. Yeah, I guess. Anyway, did you see the email from Davies about the new zoning proposal? She hadn't noticed. Of course, she hadn't. To her, the long weekend was 3 days long. Monday was the extra day off, and then it was back to work on Wednesday. The concept of a Tuesday in between simply didn't exist in her reality. It was a phantom limb of the week, and I was the only one who could still feel the ache. My isolation became a physical thing, a glass wall between me and the rest of the world. I could see them, hear them, but I couldn't connect. We were operating on different temporal software. I started to eat lunch alone at my desk. Conversations became minefields. How do you talk about your weekend when your weekend had a day in it that never happened for the other person? How do you plan for the future when you can't trust the integrity of the days leading up to it? My work suffered. My meticulous planning, once my pride, became a source of terror. I'd stare at a project timeline stretching into 2028 and feel a wave of vertigo. What did any of it matter? It was a house of cards built on a foundation of sand, with the tide of nothingness periodically washing a few of the cards away. My journal became my sanctuary, my confessor. I started a new section, the chronology of the lost. Lost Day 1, Wednesday, May 11, 2022. Lost Day 2, Tuesday, May 31, 2022. I tried to find a pattern. The first was a Wednesday, the second a Tuesday. One in the middle of the week, one at the start. One in the middle of the month, one at the end. There was no logic I could discern. The randomness was its own form of terror. My investigation became more desperate. I started spending my evenings and weekends at the Library of Birmingham, that magnificent, layered cake of a building. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Proof. An anomaly. A crack in the seamless facade of the world. I pulled up archived physical copies of newspapers. The Birmingham Mail from Monday, 30th of May, was followed directly by the edition for Wednesday, 1st of June. There was no Tuesday paper. No record of it being printed, no mention of a strike or a holiday. It was as if the paper mill, the journalists, the delivery drivers had all collectively jumped from Monday to Wednesday without noticing. It was during one of these deep dives into the library's archives, poring over old city planning documents from the 1960s for a historical precedent study, that I first saw the symbol. It was a tiny, hand-drawn mark in the margin of a blueprint for the old Bull Ring Center. A perfect circle, bisected by a single, jagged, broken line, like a lightning bolt. It looked like a stylized O, but fractured. I dismissed it as a surveyor's doodle, a random mark. But then I saw it again. A week later, walking home, faintly scratched into the faded blue paint of a canal boat moored near the Gas Street Basin. It was small, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A few days after that, I saw it on a sticker slapped onto the base of a lamppost on Corporation Street. It was the exact same design. Paranoia bloomed in my chest, rich and dark. Was I imagining it? Was my stressed mind, desperate for patterns, inventing connections where there were none? This phenomenon, apophenia, was a common symptom of psychosis. The thought chilled me more than the missing days. Was the contagion not in the world, but in me? The next time a day vanished, a Saturday, a whole, precious Saturday of freedom, just gone, I decided I had to try Sarah again. I went to her house in suburban Solihull, armed with my journal. She let me in, her expression wary. She sat me down in her messy, toy-strewn living room while the kids watched TV. "Leo, what's this about?" I opened the journal. My hands were shaking. "Look. I've been keeping a record. Wednesday the 11th of May. Tuesday the 31st of May. Saturday the 18th of June. They're gone. They happened for me, and then they were erased." She glanced at the pages, her face a mask of concern. "Leo, this isn't healthy. It's an obsession. You're writing things down, and then you're believing them more than what's actually happening. Because this is what's happening." I insisted, my voice rising. "Sarah, think. Do you remember what you did on Saturday the 18th? She sighed, a long, weary sound. "It was the weekend. We went from Friday to Sunday. We went to that soft play place in Shirley. The kids loved it. That was Sunday. What about Saturday?" "There was no Saturday," she snapped, her patience finally breaking. "The week was Friday, then Sunday. I don't know what's wrong with you, but you need help. Proper help. Not a bloody notebook." Her words hit me like a physical blow. The certainty in her voice, the absolute conviction. For a terrifying second, her reality felt more solid than mine. My memories of the lost Saturday, of planning to trim the overgrown bush on my balcony, of the book I was halfway through, felt thin and spectral, like ghosts of intentions. I left her house in a state of numb despair. The last bridge was burned. I drove back to the city center, the familiar streets feeling alien and hostile. I parked the car and just walked. My feet led me, without conscious thought, back to the canals. The water was dark and still. I saw it again, scratched into a brick on the side of a bridge. The circle with the broken line. This time, seeing it didn't feel like paranoia. It felt like a message. It wasn't a warning of my own madness. It was a signpost left by someone else. Someone else who was lost. Someone else who remembered. Fueled by this sliver of hope, I went home and turned to the one place I hadn't dared to look, the deepest, darkest corners of the internet. I ignored the mainstream sites and navigated to obscure forums, the digital backalleys dedicated to fringe science, conspiracy, and high strangeness. I used search terms that felt insane to type: chronological gaps, days disappearing from calendar, reality editing itself. Most of it was noise. But then, on a forum with a stark, text-only interface called the Glitch Report, I found it. A single thread, titled "Noticing the Gaps." It had been started 3 months ago. There were only a handful of replies. They were cautious, cryptic. But they spoke of the same thing. A lost Tuesday in February. A missing Friday in April. And then, a recent post from a user named Cassandra_22. The frequency is increasing. The last one was Saturday, June 18th. The integrity is failing. Does anyone have a working theory beyond simulation error? This feels organic. Like pruning. Saturday, the 18th of June. My breath hitched. I wasn't mad. I wasn't alone. I typed out a reply, my fingers flying across the keyboard, a torrent of relief and terror pouring out of me. I remember it too. In Birmingham, UK. I'm keeping a journal. I thought I was the only one. I hit post and stared at the screen, my heart pounding. For the first time in weeks, a tiny pinprick of light had appeared in the suffocating darkness of my isolation. But it was a fragile light, and I had no idea if it was a sunrise or the headlamp of an oncoming train. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The reply from Cassandra_22 came within the hour. It was a private message, not a public post. We don't talk on the open forum. Too much noise. Too much risk. You saw the symbol. My fingers trembled as I typed back. Yes. The circle with the broken line. I thought I was going crazy. You're not. It's a marker. For people like us. The rememberers. It's an old notation, means interrupted cycle. Appropriate, don't you think? Her name was Anya. She claimed, a postgraduate researcher in theoretical physics at the University of Manchester, specializing in quantum information theory. Our correspondence, conducted over an encrypted messaging app she insisted I download, became my lifeline. For the first time, I had a vocabulary for the horror that had engulfed my life. Anya didn't believe in aliens or ghosts or government conspiracies. Her theory was far more terrifying because it was impersonal, elemental. Think of spacetime as a processing system, she wrote one night, the green text glowing on my phone screen. It's running an infinitely complex simulation, us, the universe, everything. But maybe the system is old. Maybe it's running out of memory, or processing power. What do you do with an old computer that's getting slow? You run a defrag. You delete old files. You clear the cache. You think we're cache? I typed back, a cold dread seeping into me. Not us. The days. The redundant ones. The low traffic days. Midweek days. Quiet Saturdays. They're being pruned. Clipped from the timeline to conserve some fundamental cosmic resource. It's not malicious. It's just maintenance. Chronosmatic decay, I call it. The problem is, the deletion process isn't perfect. It leaves artifacts. Us. People with a certain neurological persistence. Our brains don't accept the patch. We remember the versions before the edit. It was insane. It was the stuff of science fiction paperbacks. But it fit. It explained the seamlessness, the lack of panic in others, the clean excision of the days. The world wasn't broken, it was being optimized, and I was the ghost of a deleted file. My journal entries became more detailed, cross-referencing my memories with Anya's. She was in Manchester, but she confirmed the same lost days. We were nodes in a tiny, scattered network of awareness. The symbol, she explained, was their way of staying sane, of leaving breadcrumbs in the forest for each other. Seeing one in the wild was a confirmation that you weren't alone. But as my understanding grew, so did the decay. The gap started coming faster. A Friday vanished, then the following Monday. We lost 2 days in a single week. The world began to fray at the edges in ways that were subtle, but deeply unsettling. It wasn't just the lost time. It was the consequence of it. People's short-term memories seemed to be getting softer, more pliable. At work, where I was now on thin ice, my performance reviewed weekly by a concerned Mr. Davies, I'd have conversations with colleagues that they would forget minutes later. Not in a dismissive way, but with a genuine, blank-faced lack of recall. Did we talk about this? Oh, sorry, my mind is a sieve today. Everyone's mind was a sieve. Language itself started to fray. People would pause mid-sentence, searching for a common word. Idioms and cultural references started to land with a thud of non-recognition. I quoted a famous line from Casablanca to Chloe one afternoon, and she just stared at me. "What's that from?" she asked, not like she hadn't seen the film, but like the concept of shared cultural touchstones was foreign to her. The city was changing, too. It was a process of simplification, of erosion. The vibrant, chaotic graffiti in the Digbeth underpasses seemed to fade, replaced by uniform gray paint. The intricate Victorian ironwork on the older buildings looked less intricate. As if the collective memory of how to appreciate such complexity was fading, and the physical world was dulling itself in response. It was entropy, but not of heat. It was an entropy of meaning. Anya and I decided we had to meet. Text on a screen wasn't enough. We needed to confirm each other's physical existence. We needed to sit in the same room, breathing the same air, and know that we were both real. We chose Birmingham as the meeting point, halfway between us. The location was specific, the bench outside the Icon Gallery in Brindley Place, at 1 p.m. on Saturday, 9th of July. The days leading up to it were the most stressful of my life. I checked the date a dozen times an hour. Please, not Friday. Don't take Friday. The universe obliged. Friday, the 8th of July, occurred without incident. I went to bed that night with a feeling of nervous, fragile hope I hadn't felt in months. Saturday arrived. It was a real, tangible Saturday. The sun was out. I put on my best shirt. I walked to Brindley Place an hour early, my heart thumping with a mixture of excitement and dread. I scouted the location. The bench was there, overlooking the canal. It was perfect. At 12:55 p.m., I sat down on the bench. My hands were sweating. I watched the crowds mill about, families with pushchairs, couples holding hands. They all seemed so placid, so untroubled, living their lives inside the clean, edited version of reality. 1 p.m. came and went. 1:10 p.m. No Anya. 1:30 p.m. I started to feel a familiar, cold panic. Maybe her train was delayed. That happened all the time. I pulled out my phone to message her. I opened the encrypted app. And I stared. The conversation thread with Cassandra_22 was gone. Not just the recent messages. The entire history. It was as if we had never spoken. My blood turned to ice water. I frantically searched my contacts for her name, Anya. Nothing. I tried to recall her surname, the exact department at the university she'd mentioned. The details were smoke. I could grasp at them, but they dissipated. The specific words of her theories, the shared jokes, the moments of connection, they were all becoming vague, like the memory of a dream upon waking. I sat on that bench until the sun began to dip behind the buildings, the sky turning a deep orange. She was never coming. A horrifying new possibility bloomed in my mind. What if Anya had been a casualty of a different kind of pruning? What if the system wasn't just deleting days, but also deleting the anomalies, the rememberers? Or worse, a thought so terrifying I almost collapsed under the weight of it, what if she had never existed at all? What if my isolated, desperate mind, armed with the clue of the symbol, had created her? A tulpa. A psychological projection to validate my own sanity. The forum post could have been a coincidence, and my mind had woven the rest. Was I so broken that I had invented my only ally? I stumbled home in a daze. The city felt like a cardboard cutout. The people were mannequins. The sounds of the traffic were a recording on a loop. My flat, once a sanctuary, felt like a cell. The final blow came on Monday. Mr. Davies called me into his office. His face was not angry, just weary. "Leo, this isn't working," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Your focus is gone. Your reports are disjointed. We've had complaints. People find your conversations unsettling." He slid a letter across the desk. "We're letting you go. We think it's for the best." I didn't argue. I just nodded, took the letter, and walked out. I had been disconnected from my job, from my sister, from my only friend. Now I was untethered from the last anchor of my old life. I was completely, utterly alone, in a world that was quietly, patiently erasing itself. And I was starting to suspect that it was erasing me, too, not by making me vanish, but by taking away everything that made me who I was, piece by piece, until nothing was left but a shell that remembered things that never were. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The weeks after my dismissal were a gray, featureless blur. I barely left my flat. The journal was my only companion, its pages filled with the frantic scrawl of a man chronicling the demolition of his own reality. The gaps became more aggressive. A Tuesday and a Wednesday vanished back to back. A Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday were ripped from the calendar, leaving a jarring leap from a lazy Saturday to a disorienting midweek. I would wake up, check my phone, and feel the lurch of temporal vertigo. The world outside my window grew simpler, quieter. The symphony of city life was being reduced to a single, monotonous chord. The tipping point was not a whisper, but a roar of silence. I went to sleep on a Sunday night. The 14th of August. I remember the date because I'd spent the day rereading my journal, trying to find a pattern, a code, a reason in the madness. I fell into a restless sleep, and woke up feeling blank. I looked at my phone. The screen read, 7 a.m., Monday, 22nd of August. An entire week. Gone. 7 days, from the 15th to the 21st, had been scooped out of existence, leaving a hollowed-out crater in the month. I felt a strange calm descend over me. The panic was gone, burned out. All that was left was a bleak, desolate clarity. I got dressed and walked outside, not with any purpose, but just to see what was left. The change was no longer subtle. It was profound. The air itself felt thin. The colors of the world were muted, as if seen through a dusty filter. The cars on the road moved with a uniform, unhurried pace. The people I passed on the pavement had a placid smoothness to their faces, their expressions devoid of stress, or joy, or anything beyond a basic, functional awareness. The subtle complexities of human emotion seemed to have been edited out. I walked towards the city center, a ghost in a simplified world. I found myself standing in front of my old office building. The grand, interactive digital display in the lobby that had showcased the Smithfield Regeneration Project, my plans for a vibrant, complex future, was gone. In its place was a smooth, gray, featureless wall. And in that moment, I understood. The revelation wasn't a complex theory from a non-existent physicist. It was crushingly simple. The universe wasn't just pruning redundant days. It was removing complexity itself. Ambition, history, art, grief, love, memory, all the messy, inefficient, beautiful, and painful data that made reality rich and dense. The Smithfield Project was an idea of a better, more intricate future. It was ambition. So it was erased. The graffiti in Digbeth was chaotic art. Erased. The intricate ironwork was a memory of a more complex past. Simplified. Casablanca was a cultural touchstone, a shared story. Forgotten. Anya, whether she was real or not, had it backwards. We weren't the artifacts. We were the data being targeted for deletion. Our memories of the lost days were symptoms of a deeper illness, the capacity for complex recall, for holding on to a past that the system deemed inefficient. The world was being streamlined into a state of placid, meaningless equilibrium, and we, the rememberers, were the final, stubborn bugs in the code. My confrontation was not with some shadowy entity or cosmic being. It was with myself, standing on the edge of Victoria Square, the heart of a city that was losing its heart. I looked at the people sitting on the benches, their faces empty of everything but the present moment. They weren't unhappy. They weren't anything. They simply were. Forgetting, I realized, was peace. A lobotomy of the soul. I saw the symbol, the broken circle, scratched faintly on the base of the statue of Queen Victoria. A final, fading message from a lost tribe. And I was faced with a choice. I could continue to fight. I could clutch my journal, this testament to a richer, messier world, and live as a ghost, screaming memories that no one could hear. I could spend the rest of my dwindling days in the agony of remembering, an anchor of a ship that had already sunk. Or I could let go. I could stop fighting the current. I could allow the edits to take hold. I could accept the peace of simplicity. I could forget the agony and, with it, the joy. I could join the placid dreamers. I walked to the canal, the one place that had always felt like a constant, and sat on a bench. The water below seemed unusually flat, its surface reflecting the gray sky with perfect, glassy stillness. I took the journal from my jacket pocket. It felt heavy, impossibly dense with forgotten worlds. I ran my thumb over the worn cover. A woman sat down at the other end of the bench. She turned to me and smiled, a simple, uncomplicated gesture. "Quiet day," she said. Her voice was monotone, yet not unpleasant. I looked at her calm, untroubled eyes. There were no stories in them. No history. No worries about a meeting tomorrow. No regrets about a mistake yesterday. I felt the memory of that first lost day, Wednesday, the 11th of May, begin to recede. It wasn't being violently ripped away. It was just, fading. Becoming less important. The sharp edges of the panic, the desperate need to prove it had existed, were softening, dissolving into a vague sense of a forgotten dream. The relief was a slow, warm tide, washing away the jagged shores of my anxiety. It was the easiest thing in the world. I closed the journal. I didn't throw it in the water. I just held it. A relic. An artifact from a different time, a different me. "Yes," I said to the woman, and the sound of my own voice was strange, calmer than I remembered it being. A very quiet day. I looked out at the city, at the simple shapes and the muted colors. It wasn't so bad. It was peaceful. What day of the week was it? I wasn't sure. It didn't seem to matter anymore. The journal felt heavy in my lap, a book written in a language I was beginning to forget, The Quiet Contagion, the hum near apartment 6B. Phase 1, The Unsettling Mundane. My life is a study in controlled silence. As a freelance translator of scientific and technical documents, my days are governed by the quiet tap of my keyboard, the soft rustle of turning pages, and the low, unobtrusive thrum of my computer's fan. I live on the 7th floor of the Nakano Crest, a 10-story concrete and glass structure that prizes efficiency over character. My apartment, 7D, is my sanctuary and my office, a space where every object has its designated place, every sound its rational source. Tokyo roars and pulses outside my triple-glazed windows, but in here, there is only the peaceful, predictable hum of my own existence. The first disruption was almost too subtle to register. It was Mrs. Sato from 6A, a woman whose entire being seemed composed of polite smiles and perfectly timed bows. I met her in the elevator, a gleaming steel box that smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaner. "Good morning, Tanaka-san," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Her gaze was distant, fixed on the polished metal wall. "Good morning, Sato-san. Is everything all right?" She tilted her head, a gesture I had seen 1,000 times. But this time, it was different. Slower. As if she were listening to something I couldn't hear. "It's very peaceful today, isn't it?" she murmured. "The song is very clear." "The song?" I asked, my brow furrowing. I could hear the faint whir of the elevator's machinery, the distant rumble of the Marunouchi line. "Yes," she said, her smile finally becoming genuine, yet unsettlingly private. Soothing. The doors opened on her floor. She bowed without looking at me and shuffled out, her steps oddly rhythmic. I dismissed it. Maybe she had new earbuds, the tiny, flesh-colored kind. Or perhaps it was just an odd turn of phrase. I had a 200-page manual on cryogenic storage to translate. My mind was already parsing English jargon into precise Japanese. I didn't have the bandwidth for neighborly eccentricities. A week later, the second incident occurred. I was disposing of my meticulously sorted garbage in the building's designated area. Mr. Yamamoto from 8C, a young, perpetually exhausted salaryman, was standing near the burnable waste bins. He was perfectly still, his expensive suit immaculate, his head cocked at the same curious angle as Mrs. Sato's. He wasn't looking at anything. He seemed to be auscultating the very air. He didn't even flinch when I slid my plastic bag into the receptacle beside him. I cleared my throat. "Yamamoto-san." He blinked slowly, like a lizard waking in the sun. "Ah. Tanaka-san." His voice was flat. "Did you hear that modulation? Just now. A shift in pitch. Remarkable." I listened. The din of Nakano, traffic, distant sirens, the cheerful jingle from the local pharmacy, was the same as ever. "I'm afraid I don't hear anything unusual." He gave me a look of profound, almost pitying, disappointment. "You must not be listening properly," he said, before turning and walking away, his posture unnaturally rigid. My ordered world began to develop hairline fractures. I started noticing things. Small things. A single, perfect camellia blossom left on the communal mailbox for 6B. A post-it note stuck to 6B's door, on which was drawn a series of wavy lines, almost like a musical staff but with no discernible notes. I plucked it off and crumpled it, annoyed by the untidiness. The door to 6B remained stubbornly closed. The nameplate was blank. I'd heard the previous tenant, an elderly woman, had moved to a nursing home months ago. The apartment was supposed to be empty. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. I was heading out to the konbini for a late-night snack when I saw her. Mrs. Sato. She wasn't in the hallway. She was pressed against it. Her cheek was flat against the cool, painted plaster of the wall separating the corridor from apartment 6B. Her eyes were closed, a look of beatific concentration on her face. Her lips moved, whispering words too soft to hear. Sato-san. My voice was sharper than I intended. She didn't startle. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. They settled on me, but it felt like she was looking through me. It's strongest here, she breathed, a conspiratorial reverence in her tone. It sings of deep places. Of the spaces between things. My blood ran cold. This wasn't earbuds. This wasn't a turn of phrase. This was a profound and shared strangeness. I backed away slowly, nodding, feigning an understanding I was terrified to lack. In the safety of my apartment, I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I strained my ears, listening with an intensity that bordered on painful. I heard the refrigerator cycle on. I heard the clock on the wall tick. I heard the distant city. And nothing else. Complete, total, and terrifying silence where they heard a song. My first instinct was to rationalize. It had to be a sound, something structural. A new pump in the basement, a faulty transformer on the utility pole, a cellular tower broadcasting on a strange frequency. Infrasound, perhaps. I spent the next 2 days obsessively researching the phenomenon. Articles spoke of infrasound inducing feelings of awe, dread, and even hallucinations. It could be generated by anything from wind turbines to ventilation systems. This was it. It had to be. A simple, physical explanation. Armed with this comforting hypothesis, I walked down to the building manager's office in the lobby. Mr. Endo was a man who seemed to have been born to wear a gray suit and a perpetually strained expression. Tanaka-san, he said, not looking up from his paperwork. How can I help you? Endo-san, I wanted to report a noise issue. A low-frequency hum. It seems to be affecting some of the residents. I chose my words carefully. He finally looked at me, his eyes tired and impatient. A hum. Tanaka-san, this is a modern building. The soundproofing is excellent. I'm not the one hearing it, I clarified, feeling foolish. Several other residents, Sato-san, Yamamoto-san, they've mentioned it. They seem quite preoccupied by it. Mr. Endo sighed, a sound of pure bureaucratic suffering. Preoccupied? People are stressed, Tanaka-san. Tokyo is a noisy city. Sometimes the mind plays tricks. Are they filing a formal complaint? No, they seem to like it. That stopped him. He put down his pen. They like the noise. They call it a song. Mr. Endo stared at me for a long moment, his expression shifting from irritation to a kind of clinical concern. Perhaps you are the one who is stressed, Tanaka-san. Working from home can be isolating. Maybe you should take a walk, get some fresh air. He dismissed me. Not with anger, but with the calm, unshakable certainty of a man who knows the world works in a particular way and will not entertain any evidence to the contrary. As I rode the elevator back up, I saw a new post-it on 6B's door, another series of nonsensical waves. Below it, on the floor, sat a small, perfectly folded paper crane. A gift. An offering. I retreated to my apartment, the silence within its walls no longer feeling like a comfort. It felt like an absence. A void. My carefully constructed reality was being eroded from the outside in, and my inability to perceive the threat was the most terrifying part of all. I wasn't just an observer, I was an anomaly. The only one, it seemed, who couldn't hear the music. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The next few weeks were a descent into a quiet, mannerly madness. The contagion, for that's what it felt like, spread with the relentless, creeping pace of moss on a stone. The listeners, as I'd started calling them in my head, were growing in number. I'd see them in the hallways, standing for long moments with their heads tilted, a faint, serene smile on their faces. The young couple in 7B, who used to argue loud enough for me to hear through the concrete, were now silent. I saw them one morning through their open doorway, sitting on the floor, back to back, their eyes closed in shared communion. The offerings outside 6B became more common. A single polished stone. A sprig of cherry blossom, impossibly fresh out of season. A child's drawing of a spiral. The post-it notes with their waveform calligraphy were replaced daily, each one slightly different from the last. It was a language, a form of worship, and I was illiterate. My isolation deepened. Conversations with neighbors became impossible hurdles. "Did you sleep well, Tanaka-san?" I asked the mother from 9F in the elevator. "The resonance was perfect last night," she replied, her eyes glazed over. "It helped the baby sleep." She patted her stroller, where her infant lay unnaturally still, not making a sound. My work, my bastion of logic and order, began to suffer. I'd find myself rereading the same sentence over and over, my focus shattered. My apartment, once a haven, now felt like a sterile observation chamber. I took to watching my neighbors through the peephole, a paranoid voyeur in my own home. I documented everything in a password-protected file on my computer, a digital journal of the encroaching insanity. October 17th, saw the salaryman from 8C, Yamamoto, press his ear to an electrical outlet in the lobby. He stayed there for 3 full minutes. The cleaning lady worked around him as if it were the most normal thing in the world. October 22nd, a new behavior. Humming. It's not loud. A soft, single-note drone. Heard it from at least 4 different people in the corridor this morning. The notes are slightly different, but they seem to harmonize. It's discordant, yet purposeful. October 25th, they are beginning to ignore me. It's not hostile. It's more like I'm not on the same plane of existence. I said, "Good morning," to Mrs. Sato, and she walked past me, her eyes fixed on the wall, a blissful smile on her face. I am becoming invisible. I tried calling my sister, Emmy, who lived in Yokohama. I needed an anchor, a voice from the world I remembered. "Kenji. You sound strange. Are you eating properly?" "Emmy, something weird is happening in my building." I tried to explain, stumbling over the words, aware of how unhinged I sounded. "People are listening to a sound, a hum, that isn't there. They're obsessed." "A hum? Like from the plumbing?" "You should tell your landlord." I did. He thinks I'm crazy. "Emmy," they whisper to the walls. They leave, offerings. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Kenji, you've been working too hard. You know how you get when you're stressed. You fixate. Remember when you thought the cicadas were chirping in Morse code? This is different. Is it?" Her voice was gentle, but it felt like a door closing in my face. "Why don't you come down to Yokohama for the weekend? Get out of that apartment. It would do you good." I hung up, the feeling of alienation more profound than ever. She thought I was cracking up. Maybe I was. Maybe this was all some elaborate psychological breakdown, and my neighbors were just living their normal lives while my brain twisted their actions into a paranoid narrative. The thought was both terrifying and, for a moment, a relief. That relief was shattered by Yui. She was young, maybe a university student, with brightly dyed purple hair and a patched-up tote bag covered in anime characters. I'd seen her around, but we'd never spoken. I found her one afternoon crouched in the hallway, not listening, but taking high-resolution photos of the latest drawing on 6B's door with her phone. My heart leaped. Another observer. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice coming out as a croak. She looked up, startled, but not scared. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent. Documenting. What does it look like? You see it too. I gestured vaguely at the door, the silent hallway, the whole oppressive atmosphere. The strangeness? A slow grin spread across her face. The Club? Yeah, I see it. You're the guy from 7D, right? The quiet one. I'm Kenji Tanaka. Yui Ito. 5C, she stood up, brushing dust from her jeans. So you're not one of them, then? You can't hear it either. The relief was so immense I felt dizzy. No. I hear nothing. Same. Which makes us the interesting ones, doesn't it? She tapped her phone. At first I thought it was a new ARG. You know, an alternate reality game. Some clever viral marketing for a new movie or something. Leave cryptic clues, get people to act weird, build buzz online. It was the most plausible explanation I had heard yet. A carefully orchestrated stunt. It explained the coordinated behavior, the cryptic symbols. It didn't feel right, the sincerity of the listeners was too deep, too placid, but it was a rational framework. But you don't think that anymore? I asked. Yui's grin faded. No. It's been going on too long. And it's adapting. The humming started last week. And look at this. She zoomed in on the photo on her phone. The wavy lines were more complex now, almost like a circuit diagram or a fractal. This isn't marketing. This is something else. Something organic. We stood there in the silent, humming hallway, two islands of bewildered sanity in a sea of placid obsession. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't entirely alone. But my new ally's fascination was tinged with an excitement that worried me. She saw it as a puzzle to be solved. I saw it as a threat to be survived. Our alliance began. We met in stairwells and communicated via encrypted messaging apps, trading observations. Yui used her university access to pull up architectural plans for the building. There was nothing unusual about 6B, standard layout, same wiring and plumbing as every other B unit. We looked up the former tenant, the elderly woman. Her name was Chiyo Watanabe. Public records showed she'd been a music teacher, specializing in traditional instruments like the koto and shamisen. A coincidence? Or a clue? The subplot of that empty apartment became our focus. If the source was in 6B, we had to get inside. But the behavior of the listeners was escalating in a way that pushed our investigation to the background. They began to synchronize. Every day at sunset, for about 5 minutes, all activity in the hallways would cease. Any listeners caught outside their apartments would stop, turn to face the direction of 6B, and close their eyes. A silent, standing prayer. The air in the building grew thick with their shared, unheard frequency. It was in my own apartment that the final barrier of my sanity was breached. I was looking for a misplaced book, and I knelt to check under my desk. My fingers brushed against the wooden floorboards. And I felt it. A carving. I scrambled for my phone, using its light to see. There, etched into the wood, faint but unmistakable, was a small, wavy symbol. It matched one of the earlier designs from the post-it notes on 6B's door. It had not been there before. I knew my apartment down to the last scuff mark. I hadn't carved it. Which meant the anomaly was no longer just outside my door. It was inside. It was in my sanctuary. It was seeping through the walls, through the floor, writing its silent scripture in the very heart of my world. The silence in my head no longer felt like immunity. It felt like a vacuum, waiting to be filled. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The discovery of the symbol in my own apartment changed everything. The threat was no longer contained, it was invasive. My carefully maintained fortress had been breached by an enemy I couldn't see, hear, or comprehend. Paranoia became my constant companion. I checked my floors and walls daily, searching for new sigils. I started sleeping with a chair wedged under my doorknob, a futile gesture against an intangible foe. Yui was less perturbed. To her, it was a fascinating data point. "It's a transmission," she said over a hushed call, her voice buzzing with academic excitement. "The building itself is becoming a resonator. The patterns aren't just symbols, they're like acoustic shadows. Traces left by the hum." "Traces of what, Yui? What is it?" "I have a theory," she said, lowering her voice further. "It's not infrasound. It's not a machine. I think it's a conceptual bleed. From another dimension, maybe. Or a non-human intelligence communicating on a level we're not equipped for. The hum is just the carrier wave. The real message is the change it causes in people. It's rewriting their perception of reality." I, the pragmatist, recoiled. "That's science fiction. Is it any more sci-fi than half the building worshipping an empty apartment?" she countered. I had no answer. Our focus returned to 6B. It was the nexus. We had to get in. Pleading with Mr. Endo was useless. He had recently taken to spending his lunch break standing in the lobby, head tilted towards the ceiling, a placid smile on his face. He was a listener now. The institution had fallen. Our chance came in the form of a fire inspection notice. Mandatory access to all units. Yui, a master of social engineering, managed to accidentally bump into the inspection team, causing a flurry of dropped clipboards and feigned apologies. In the confusion, she lifted the master keycard for Building B for less than a minute, long enough to clone it using a device she'd bought online. It felt like a scene from a spy movie, a thrilling, terrifying break from our slow, creeping horror. That night, we stood before the door to 6B. The air here was different, still, heavy, and expectant. The silence felt deeper, more profound. My hands trembled as I held the cloned keycard. "Ready?" Yui whispered, her eyes gleaming in the dim hallway light. I nodded, my throat too dry for words. I swiped the card. The lock clicked, a sound that seemed obscenely loud in the reverent quiet. I pushed the door open. The apartment was utterly, pristinely empty. No furniture. No boxes. No stray belongings. The walls were a sterile white, the floor a pale, polished wood. Dust motes danced in a single beam of light from the hallway. It was an empty space, nothing more. We stepped inside, the door closing softly behind us, plunging us into near darkness, save for the ambient city glow from the single large window. "There's nothing here," I whispered, a wave of anticlimactic disappointment washing over me. "Shoo, don't use your eyes," Yui murmured. She was standing in the center of the room, her own eyes closed. "Feel it." I closed my eyes. I focused. I tried to hear the hum, to feel the resonance, to understand what had captivated an entire building. But there was nothing. Only the silence. Yet, the silence was different in here. In my own apartment, the silence was an absence of noise. Here, the silence was a presence. It was a physical weight, a pressure against my eardrums. It felt ancient, absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum, the stillness of a dead universe. It was the most profound and terrifying thing I had ever experienced. I opened my eyes. Yui was swaying gently on the spot. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "The silence. It's the source. The hum isn't the sound, it's the echo. It's what reality sounds like rushing to fill this hole." A horrifying understanding began to dawn. The hum wasn't coming from 6B. 6B was the absence. A null point. A puncture in the fabric of the world. The song the others heard was the universe's reaction to this void, a sound of friction, of reality eroding at the edges. Suddenly, Yui gasped. Her hand flew to her head. "Oh," she said, her voice small. "Oh, I can. I can almost hear it now. From the other side." "Yui, no," I said, grabbing her arm. Her skin was cold. She looked at me, but her focus was inward. A slow, serene smile, the very same smile I'd seen on Mrs. Sato's face, spread across her lips. "You really can't hear it, Kenji. It's like bells. Made of water." My only ally was slipping away, right in front of me. I pulled her toward the door. "We have to go. Now." She didn't resist. She moved with a strange, fluid grace, her feet barely seeming to touch the floor. As we stepped back into the hallway, she turned and looked at the empty room, a look of longing on her face. The stakes had escalated beyond my darkest fears. The contagion wasn't just spreading, it was seducing. It offered a kind of peace, a transcendence that I was uniquely immune to. My immunity, I was beginning to realize, was not a shield. It was a curse. The next day, Yui sent me a message. "It's not a bleed. It's a resonance. We're the ones who are out of tune. The hum is the correct frequency. We just have to learn to listen." I tried to call her. She didn't answer. I hammered on her door. There was no reply. A few days later, the offerings outside 6B changed. Alongside the flowers and stones, new items appeared. A manga volume with a purple-haired character on the cover. A small, intricately patched piece of denim. A single, brightly colored key chain. Yui hadn't just been converted. She had made her own offering. She had given herself to the silence. I was now, and perhaps forever, completely alone. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. My solitude was absolute. Yui was gone, absorbed into the quiet collective. My digital journal felt like a eulogy for a world that only I remembered. The listeners were no longer just coexisting with the hum, they were cultivating it. Their synchronized moments of listening grew longer. They started tracing the waveform patterns on the hallway walls with their fingers, leaving faint, greasy trails. The building had ceased to be an apartment block, it was a monastery dedicated to an invisible, inaudible God. My fear had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard knot of resolve. I could not run. Where would I go? Another city? Another country? The silence in 6B didn't feel local. It felt fundamental. I couldn't fight it. What was there to punch? What was there to destroy? The only path left was understanding. My confrontation would not be with a monster or a villain, but with the phenomenon itself. I had to go back to 6B. Not to investigate, but to listen. To try, one last time, to understand what I was missing. I used the cloned keycard again. This time, no one was in the hallway. The whole building was hushed, caught in the grip of a late afternoon listening session. The door to 6B clicked open. I stepped inside. The silence washed over me, heavier than before. It was a living entity now, vast and patient. I walked to the center of the room, to the spot where Yui had stood when she'd first heard the bells of water. I closed my eyes and did the one thing I had been resisting for months. I let go. I stopped trying to hear a sound. I stopped trying to find a source. I stopped trying to rationalize. I just existed. I let the profound, absolute stillness of the room permeate my being. I let my own internal silence merge with the greater silence around me. And then, I understood. There was no hum. There never had been. The listeners were not hearing a sound. They were feeling a realignment. The world I knew, the world of cause and effect, of solid matter and predictable physics, was a cacophony. A chaotic, roaring, screaming mess. The hum was simply the sound of that chaos smoothing out. It was the sound of entropy reversing. It was the sound of reality being ironed flat, becoming simple, placid, and utterly coherent. The people in my building weren't going mad. They were getting well. And I, Kenji Tanaka, translator of complex manuals, lover of order and quiet precision, was the most chaotic and dissonant thing of all. My brain, with its anxieties, its memories, its desperate need to categorize and explain, was a shrieking engine of noise in a world that was learning to be quiet. I couldn't hear the hum for the same reason one cannot hear the silence in a vacuum. I was already part of the void. My lifelong sense of isolation, my preference for a quiet, ordered life, it wasn't a personality trait. It was a symptom. I was already attuned to the silence, the endpoint. The listeners were on a journey toward it, and the hum was the sound of their transformation. I was already at the destination. I opened my eyes. The room was the same, but my perception of it had been irrevocably altered. In the center of the floor, the dust motes had settled into an impossibly intricate pattern, a fractal mandala of exquisite complexity. It wasn't a sound wave fossilized. It was a blueprint. A diagram for the new reality. I turned and left apartment 6B, closing the door softly behind me. I walked down the silent hallway, past the still, serene figures of my neighbors. Mrs. Sato stood by the elevator, her eyes closed, a look of sublime peace on her face. She was beautiful. I didn't take the elevator. I walked down the 10 flights of stairs and out the main entrance, into the roaring heart of Tokyo. The noise was overwhelming. The rumble of trains, the clang of crossing signals, the chatter of a million people, the endless hum of electricity and commerce. It sounded like a scream. A chaotic, disorganized, meaningless scream. I stood on the crowded pavement, a ghost at the feast. The world was still loud, still messy, still gloriously, painfully alive. But I could feel the silence behind me, radiating from the Nakano crest. A single, perfect, quiet note in a symphony of chaos. A contagion of peace. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that it was spreading. I can't hear their song. I never will. I am the silence that comes after the music has stopped. And as I walk through the screaming city, I am more alone than ever, waiting for the rest of the world to finally fall quiet. Waiting for it to learn the beauty of the hum. Waiting for it to join me. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life was measured in the clean, artificial breaths of the Eastgate Galleria. Most people saw a mall as a place of transit, a means to an end, a new pair of jeans, a food court lunch, a movie. For me, it was the beginning, middle, and end of every weekday. I worked at the Book Nook, a cozy, perpetually underlit store on the second floor of the North Wing, a pocket of quiet smelling of paper and dust mites, nestled between the deafening sensory assault of a gaming arcade and the cloying perfume cloud of a bath bomb shop. I had been an art history student at Monash University before the money, and more honestly, the will, had run out. I'd spent years learning to deconstruct Renaissance triptychs and dissect the subtle propaganda in Soviet realism. Now, my finely honed observational skills were used to spot teenagers trying to read an entire graphic novel in the aisles without paying for it. There was a certain irony in that. My life, once a grand canvas I felt I was meant to paint, had become a predictable, repeating pattern on commercial-grade linoleum. And I loved the pattern. I loved the 8:17 a.m. train to Cheltenham, the 10-minute walk past suburban houses with their neatly trimmed nature strips. I loved entering the Galleria through the same glass sliding doors of the south entrance, the gust of perfectly climate-controlled air at daily baptism. My path was a ritual, past the central fountain with its anemic water jets, up the grand escalator that faced the Meyer department store, a hard right at the mobile phone kiosk, and along the echoing corridor to the Book Nook. It was a map etched into my muscle memory. The mall was my monastery, its predictable layout a comfort against the formless anxiety of a future I had failed to plan for. The first tremor in my reality was so small I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday. As I approached the grand escalator, I saw it was running down. I stopped, blinking. That wasn't right. The up escalator was the one on the left, the down on the right. Always. I looked around for a sign, a plastic yellow warning of maintenance in progress. There was nothing. Shoppers flowed around me, stepping onto the descending stairs without a flicker of surprise, their faces placid, content. I felt a prickle of irritation, the kind you get when the council changes the bin day without telling you. I sighed and took the stairs 2 at a time, my routine disrupted, my rhythm thrown. Brenda, my manager, was already there, unpacking a box of new releases. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a cynical wit sharp enough to slice packing tape and a kindness she reserved for stray cats and employees on the verge of a breakdown. "Morning, Leo. You look like you've seen a ghost." "The main escalator's running the wrong way," I said, dropping my bag behind the counter. Brenda looked up, her brow furrowed. "The one by Meyer?" "No, it isn't. I just came up it." I stared at her. "Brenda, I'm telling you, it was going down. I had to take the stairs." She gave a wry smile, the one that said, "Bless your cotton socks, you strange young man. Maybe you came in the Kmart entrance. There's run the other way." "I never used the Kmart entrance." "Well, there you go." "Big Monday night, was it?" she asked, a twinkle in her eye. I hadn't done anything on Monday night but eat 2-minute noodles and watch a documentary about fraudulent art dealers. I let it drop. It was easier. It had to be me. I was tired, distracted. That was the only logical explanation. A few days later, another crack appeared. Our neighbor to the right had always been a generic phone case kiosk, case closed. It was an island of cheap plastic and garish glitter. But on Friday, it was gone. In its place stood the Pretzel Pit, a kiosk of identical size and shape, radiating a greasy, cinnamon sugar warmth. When did that happen? I asked Brenda, gesturing with my thumb. She was sorting receipts, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. "When did what happen?" "The pretzel place. Case closed is gone." Brenda peered over her spectacles. She looked at the Pretzel Pit, then back at me. "Leo, love, that pretzel place has been there for 6 months. A fella named Gary runs it. You bought a salted one off him last week, don't you remember? Said it was aggressively mediocre. My blood ran cold. I had no memory of that. None. I remembered buying a coffee, I remembered complaining about the price, but I did not remember a pretzel. I definitely did not remember Gary. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like a physical weight in my stomach, that a phone case kiosk had been there on Thursday. I had watched a woman with a screaming toddler argue with the vendor for 10 minutes. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "No, it was phone cases." Brenda's face softened. "You're working too hard. You've got that look again. Like you're trying to see through a wall." She put a hand on my arm. "It's a mall, Leo. It's not a bloody masterpiece by Caravaggio. Don't stare at it so hard, you'll go cross-eyed." I wanted to believe her. It was the most comforting, the most sane, option. My brain, under the low-grade stress of a dead-end job and a life on hold, was simply misfiring. Memories were fallible, perceptions skewed by fatigue. I forced a smile and went to shelve the new biographies, the chill in my gut refusing to thaw. Over the next 2 weeks, the unsettling mundane became my constant companion. A row of public telephones near the food court, relics I'd always found oddly comforting, vanished. When I mentioned them to a security guard, he gave me a blank look and said, "There haven't been payphones in here for a decade, mate." The enormous, kitschy clock in the center of the food court, which had always played a tinny rendition of Waltzing Matilda on the hour, now played a jaunty, unrecognizable polka. No one else seemed to notice the change in the national anthem of their lunch break. I started to notice the shoppers. Not all of them, but some. There was a woman with severe, blonde bobbed hair who I saw every single day. She always wore a beige trench coat, regardless of the weather. She would walk a precise route, from the Susan fashion store to the Mecca cosmetics counter, where she would purchase a single tube of Nude Ambition lipstick. Then she would leave. Every single day. There was a man in a tweed jacket who would buy a box of Earl Grey tea from the supermarket, walk to a specific bench overlooking the fountain, sit for exactly 7 minutes, then get up and walk out, leaving the tea behind. I saw him do it 3 days in a row. These were the loopers, as I started calling them in my head. Their behavior was too specific, too ritualistic to be coincidence. They were like clockwork figures in a town square automaton, performing their purpose for an unseen audience. And their numbers were growing. Once, they were oddities. Now, I saw them everywhere. A teenager endlessly circling the gaming arcade but never going in. A young couple holding hands, walking the exact same lap of the upper level, their faces serene and empty. They were the mall's congregation, and their placid, repetitive worship was starting to terrify me. I began to feel like I was the ghost, haunting the edges of a world that was functioning on a logic I couldn't grasp. I tried to anchor myself. I started taking photos with my phone. A shot of the store directory, a massive, backlit map near the main entrance. The next day, I stood in the same spot, looking at my phone's screen and then at the directory. On my phone, the book nook was clearly marked on the second floor, north wing. On the directory in front of me, we were now on the first floor, south wing, next to a lingerie store that hadn't existed yesterday. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt a wave of dizziness, a vertiginous sense of reality dissolving at the edges. I looked at the shoppers gliding past, their eyes glazed, their movements fluid and purposeful. They were navigating this new layout with an ease that felt obscene. I stumbled into the nearest men's room, locking the cubicle door behind me. I splashed cold, gritty water on my face from the basin. The face in the mirror was pale, the eyes wide with a fear that was quickly curdling into panic. This wasn't me. It wasn't my memory. It was the place. The mall was changing. It was rearranging itself like a restless sleeper, and I was the only one waking up during the night. And the worst part, the part that truly began the isolation, was that nobody else seemed to care. In fact, they seemed to prefer it. Their collective amnesia was a comfortable blanket, and I was the only one left shivering in the cold. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The rationalizations fell away like dead leaves, leaving the stark, skeletal truth exposed. I was not mistaken, I was not stressed, I was not going mad. I was a witness. I began a new, secret ritual. Every morning before my shift, I would walk the entire mall, both levels, with a small notebook and a pen. I drew maps. Crude, frantic things, full of arrows and crossed-out names. I noted the locations of the anchor stores, Meijer, David Jones, Kmart, the cinema, which seemed to be the only constants, the tent pegs holding down this flapping canvas of reality. Everything else was fluid. One Monday, Susan was on the ground floor, opposite the fountain. By Wednesday, it had swapped places with JB Hi-Fi from the upper level. The escalators that serviced the east wing, a bank of 4, all ran upwards for an entire day, creating an impassable barrier for anyone not willing to risk a dangerous descent. The loopers, however, simply adjusted their paths, flowing like water around a new stone, their blank faces betraying no frustration, only purpose. My maps became a portfolio of madness. Each day's drawing contradicted the last. The evidence was irrefutable, but it was evidence only I could see. I tried showing Brenda my notebook. "Look," I said, my voice trembling with a desperate need to be believed. I spread 2 maps across the counter, dated a day apart. See? Yesterday, we were next to the sunglass hut. Today, it's a frozen yogurt place. And the toilets have moved to the other side of the corridor. Brenda picked up the drawings. She held them as if they were contaminated. Her expression wasn't one of disbelief, but of a profound, pitying confusion. It was worse. "Leo," she said gently, placing the notebooks back down. "This is the yogurt place. It's always been the yogurt place. We had that chat with the owner, Chloe, last month about her noisy blender, remember?" A chasm opened in my mind. I had a vague, foggy memory of a conversation about a blender, but in that memory, the shop had been a smoothie bar, not frozen yogurt. The details were being retroactively smeared, painted over. My own mind was an unreliable narrator, being edited by an unseen hand. "Brenda, please," I begged. "Just, try to remember yesterday. What was next to us?" She stared into the middle distance, her brow furrowed in concentration. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a shadow of the same terror I felt. Then it was gone, smoothed over by a wave of placid certainty. "The yogurt place," she said, her voice flat. "Always the yogurt place." She started wiping down the counter, a repetitive, circular motion. Her movements were becoming more precise, more economical. Less Brenda. I realized with a jolt that she was developing her own loop. Wiping the counter. Straightening the same pile of bestsellers. Checking the till. Over and over. The contagion was seeping through the walls of the book nook. I was sharing my sanctuary with it. My isolation became absolute. I was an island in a sea of serene dementia. The mall wasn't just a building, it was a consciousness, a malevolent intelligence that was sandpapering reality smooth, removing all the inconvenient, complex edges. And its inhabitants were its willing accomplices. I started a new line of inquiry. The staff. The cleaners, the security guards. They had to know. Their jobs depended on a consistent geography. I saw a cleaner late one evening, a wiry man with tired eyes, mopping the floor. I watched him mop his way down a corridor. He turned a corner that led to the service elevators. I knew this because I had used it myself to take out the rubbish. I waited a minute, then followed. The corner was no longer a corner. It was a solid wall, adorned with a giant advertisement for a perfume. The cleaner was gone. There was no sign he had ever been there. I pressed my hands against the cool, smooth surface of the wall. It was utterly solid. I felt a surge of claustrophobia, the unnerving feeling that the walls themselves were alive and watching me. This led me to the subplot of the glyphs. It was behind a loose skirting board near the new, non-existent corner that I found the first one. A small symbol, drawn in what looked like white chalk. It was a circle with a jagged line breaking through it, like a simplified drawing of a lightning strike through a hoop. It was deliberate. It was a sign. My obsession shifted. I was no longer just mapping the mall's changes, I was hunting for these glyphs. I found them in the most obscure places, scratched onto the underside of a table in the food court, drawn in the dust on top of a fire extinguisher case, etched into the metal plate of a service door. They were markers left by someone else who could see. I wasn't alone. The thought was so powerful it almost brought me to my knees with relief. The trail of glyphs led me, over the course of a week, to a security guard. His name tag read Miles. He was different from the others. The other guards walked with the same fluid, purposeful gait as the loopers. They were the mall's shepherds. But Miles was twitchy. His eyes darted everywhere. He held his radio with white-knuckled tension. He never walked a straight line, always hugging the walls, taking strange, inefficient routes. He was avoiding the main currents of people. He was walking like me. One evening, I saw him near the cinema complex on the top floor. The area was mostly deserted. He was pretending to check a fire exit door, but I saw him quickly stoop and draw the glyph on the floor behind it. I took a deep breath and approached him. "You see it too, don't you?" I said, my voice low. Miles spun around, his hand instinctively going to the baton on his belt. His face was a mask of fear and hostility. He was younger than I thought. Maybe mid-20s, with a gaunt, sleep-deprived look. "See what?" he snapped. "Piss off. I'm working." "The changes," I persisted, taking a step closer. "The store's moving. The corridors that lead nowhere. I've been mapping it." His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The hostility flickered, replaced by a desperate, hungry curiosity. "You're the bookshop kid," he said. He'd seen me. He'd been watching me too. "My name is Leo." He glanced nervously down the empty corridor. "Not here," he hissed. "Service corridor. North wing, behind the pet store. 5 minutes." He turned and walked away, his pace brisk and erratic. I felt a giddy mix of terror and elation. I was about to step off my island and onto someone else's. I didn't know if he was a savior or just another castaway, but either was better than being alone. I followed the path he described, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the tinny, looping polka that passed for music in this place. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope, a dangerous, fragile thing in the heart of the quiet contagion. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The service corridor behind Pet's Paradise smelled of damp concrete and disinfectant. A single, bare bulb hummed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. Miles was waiting for me, leaning against a stack of flattened cardboard boxes. The frantic energy he had in the main mall was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. "You're a bloody idiot for talking to me out there," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They watch. Or, it watches." "It?" I asked, the word hanging in the dead air. "The building. The mall. Whatever you want to call it," he said, pushing himself off the boxes. "I don't know what it is. An organism, a machine, a dimensional parasite. All I know is that it's alive, and it's hungry." This was it. The confirmation I had craved, delivered in the stark, terrifying language of someone who had been living with it for much longer than I had. "How long have you known?" "About a year," Miles sighed. "I used to be a cop. Medically discharged for PTSD. Took this job because it was supposed to be quiet. Mindless. Turns out, mindless is its favorite flavor." He gestured vaguely towards the wall, towards the main concourse. "It feeds on routine. On predictability. Look at the loopers, the ones you see every day. The lipstick lady, the tea drinker. They're the prize cattle. They give off the richest, energy, or whatever. Placid, repetitive thought. It's like a drug for this place." My blood chilled. His theory resonated with a horrifying logic. The mall wasn't just changing randomly, it was optimizing itself. "The rearrangements," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "It's creating more efficient grazing paths. It's streamlining the process." "Exactly," Miles nodded, a flicker of appreciation in his tired eyes. "It shunts the stores around, changes the routes, to keep the herd flowing smoothly. It removes obstacles. It learns. It knows the paths we're supposed to take." "The glyphs," I said. "What are they?" "Breadcrumbs. For me. For anyone else who wakes up. They mark the weak spots, the seams. Places where it stretched thin. And they're a warning." He pointed to the glyph he'd drawn, the circle with the breaking line. "This means the path is a lie. He explained his survival strategy. Never walk the same route twice. Avoid the main thoroughfares, the currents of people. Stick to the service corridors when possible. Most importantly, he said, pulling a pair of bulky, industrial-looking earmuffs from his belt, block out the music. The polka? I asked. It's not polka. It's a signal. A frequency. It's like a shepherd's whistle. It lulls them, keeps them on the path. When you wear these, he held out the earmuffs, the world gets sharper. Uglier. But you can think. You can see the glitches. He was right. The moment I put on the earmuffs he offered, the world snapped into a horrifyingly sharp focus. The incessant, looping tune vanished, and in its place was a low, subsonic hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. And I could see it. A shimmer at the end of the corridor, like heat haze. The corner of a wall that seemed to blur and resolve itself. The mall wasn't just changing when I wasn't looking, it was in a constant state of subtle flux, a quantum nightmare of shifting probabilities. My alliance with Miles became my lifeline. We met in secret, in the grimy, forgotten arteries of the building. He taught me how to read the mall. How a sudden cold spot meant a wall was soft and might change. How the flickering of the fluorescent lights was a prelude to a major reorg. The stakes escalated dramatically. The mall, or whatever it was, seemed to notice my new awareness. It became actively hostile. One afternoon, I took a shortcut I'd used the day before, only to find the corridor stretching out before me, elongating like a camera pulling focus, the far end receding into an impossible distance. Panic seized me, and I turned and ran, the sound of my own ragged breaths loud in the sudden silence. Brenda was a lost cause. She had fully succumbed. One morning I came in to find her not at the counter, but standing by the window, staring down at the fountain. She was smiling, a serene, beatific expression on her face. She stayed there for her entire shift. Didn't speak, didn't move. She had become one of them. The next day, she wasn't there. A new manager, a cheerful young man named Tom, was behind the counter. He told me Brenda had retired last month. He even showed me the cheerful card everyone had signed for her. My signature was on it. I had no memory of writing it. The mall had not just removed her, it had erased her, patching over the hole in reality with a new, more convenient fact. The quiet contagion wasn't just about getting lost in a shifting building, it was about being unwritten from the story. Miles was growing more and more paranoid. He was convinced the mall was learning his patterns of avoidance. It's laying traps now, he whispered to me during one of our clandestine meetings in a dusty electrical closet. Service doors that open onto brick walls. Stairs that lead back to where you started. It's playing with us. He had a theory, a desperate, last-ditch one. It has a heart, he said, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. A central processing unit. A brain. The old sub-basement. Under the original foundation of the first department store built on this land, before the Galleria was even a thing. What's down there? I asked. The main power conduits. The oldest part of the structure. I think that's where the reorgs originate from. The signal is strongest there. But it's also where it's most vulnerable. Its defenses are all geared towards the public areas, the grazing fields. It doesn't expect anyone to go into the guts. His plan was insane. He wanted us to go down there, during a major reorg, which he'd calculated would happen at 3:33 a.m. on Thursday morning. He believed there was a service exit in the sub-basement that led directly out to an old, disused loading dock. An exit that was off every map, even the mall's own shifting ones. It's the only way out, Leo, he said, his voice pleading. We can't just keep hiding in the corridors. Sooner or later, it will corner us. It will smooth us over. We either get out, or we get absorbed. I looked around the small, humming closet, at the dust motes dancing in the single beam of my torch. Outside, I could feel the low thrum of the mall, the gentle, rhythmic pulse of thousands of people walking in circles, their minds wiped clean, their purpose singular. I thought of Brenda's empty smile. I thought of my own signature on a farewell card I never signed. He was right. Hiding wasn't living. It was just a slower way of disappearing. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm in. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The mall at 3 a.m. was a different beast. The lights were dimmed to a skeletal glow, the silence profound and heavy, broken only by the hum of the climate control and the distant, spectral echo of the cleaning machines. Without the crowds, the space felt impossibly vast, a cathedral of consumption waiting for its congregation. The music was off, but the low, bone-deep hum Miles had pointed out was stronger than ever. It was the sound of the building breathing in its sleep. Miles met me by the shuttered entrance to the food court. He was kitted out like an urban explorer, headlamp, backpack, a crowbar strapped to the side. He handed me a headlamp and a pair of worn leather gloves. "Ready?" he asked, his voice tight. "No," I answered honestly. A grim smile touched his lips. "Good. Means you're paying attention." Our journey to the sub-basement was a descent into a nightmare of logistics. Miles led the way, relying on his glyphs and a terrifyingly intuitive sense of the building's shifting moods. We navigated through the back-of-house labyrinth, a world of exposed pipes, clattering ventilation shafts, and concrete floors stained with decades of grime. The geometry here was even less reliable. Corridors would end abruptly in freshly laid cinderblock walls that still smelled of wet mortar. Doors marked electrical would open into cold storage rooms, the air thick with the phantom scent of butchered meat. The mall was fighting us. The hum intensified, and the air grew thick and heavy, as if the pressure were changing. I saw things in my peripheral vision, shadows that detached from their objects and skittered away, impossible angles that bent and snapped back into place, a reflection in a dark window of a figure that wasn't there. It was like the building's immune system was kicking in, trying to isolate and destroy the infection, us. We finally reached a heavy, rust-streaked steel door with a faded stencil that read, "Sub-basement access, authorized personnel only." Miles pulled the crowbar from his pack. "This is the point of no return," he said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Once we're in, we have to make it to the loading dock exit before the reorg finishes. Otherwise, the way out will be gone. And the way back will be gone too." With a groan of tortured metal, he pried the door open. The air that washed over us was ancient and cold, smelling of earth and ozone and something else, something organic and wrong, like a vast, subterranean fungus. The sub-basement was a cavern of concrete pillars and thick bundles of ancient wiring that snaked across the ceiling like black veins. The hum was a deafening, physical presence here. It wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration that shook my teeth. And at the center of the cavern, I saw it. It wasn't a machine, not really. It was a colossal, pulsating mass of cables, conduits, and what looked like organic matter, all fused together around the building's original, stone foundation. It glowed with a sickly, purple light, and with every pulse, the hum rose in pitch. It was the heart. The brain. The source. 3:33 a.m. As if on cue, the entire structure groaned. The pulsing from the central mass intensified, and a wave of psychic pressure washed over us, so powerful I had to clutch my head and gasp. The very fabric of the space began to warp. Pillars seemed to bend like rubber. The ceiling rippled. The reorg had begun. Now. Miles yelled over the din, "The exit is on the far wall. Go." We ran. The floor beneath us felt unstable, shifting like the deck of a ship in a storm. But as we scrambled between the pillars, I saw them. Figures emerging from the shadows. They weren't the loopers. They were the other security guards, the shepherds. Their movements were unnaturally smooth, their faces devoid of all expression. They moved not to intercept us, but to hurt us, to guide us onto a path the mall wanted us to take. We dodged and weaved, adrenaline singing in my veins. The exit, a heavy red door, was in sight. We were almost there. Then, the floor between me and Miles buckled. A concrete wall, slick and new, shot up from the ground with the speed of a guillotine, separating us. Miles! I screamed. I heard his muffled shout from the other side. Leo! It's a trap. This was a pattern. It knew the plan. I slammed my fists against the wall. It was solid. Unyielding. He was gone. On the floor, just on my side of the new wall, was a small, hastily scrawled glyph, a spiral that tightened into a single point. His last message. A pattern leads to a trap. My blood ran cold. Miles's plan, our escape. His research, the glyphs, it was all just a more complex routine. A more interesting loop for the mall to observe and consume. We weren't rebels, we were entertainment. The shepherds were closing in, their movements silent and inexorable. The red exit door, my goal, suddenly seemed like the most obvious trap of all. Panic gave way to a strange, terrifying clarity. Make a new pattern. Miles's final, desperate thought. To escape a system that feeds on logic, you have to become illogical. To escape a path, you must walk with no destination. I abandoned the exit. I turned away from it and did the most nonsensical thing I could think of. I closed my eyes, spun around 3 times, and walked in the direction I was facing when I stopped. I started singing Waltzing Matilda under my breath, the old, correct version. I walked backwards for 10 paces. I hopped on 1 foot. I touched every third pillar I passed. I was creating my own ritual, a sequence of such pointless, random chaos that it couldn't be predicted. The mall seemed to recoil in confusion. The hum faltered. The walls groaned, not with the smooth confidence of the reorg, but with a sound of pained, grinding confusion. The shepherds froze, their programming unable to compute my erratic behavior. They were built to herd, not to chase a madman. I stumbled on, my nonsensical pilgrimage taking me deeper into the labyrinth. And then my hand, reaching out to touch another pillar, met nothing. It passed through empty air. My eyes snapped open. I was standing in front of a door. It wasn't red. It wasn't marked. It was a simple, wooden door in a concrete wall where no door should be. It was a glitch. A seam that my madness had ripped open. Without a second thought, I threw it open and plunged through. The sensation was like being born. I fell from the darkness into cool night air, tumbling onto a patch of wet grass and weeds. I gasped, the air sharp and real in my lungs, smelling of rain and damp earth and car exhaust. It was the most beautiful smell I had ever known. I scrambled to my feet. I was in a narrow, overgrown laneway behind the Galleria. The wall I had come through was just a solid brick wall, stained with graffiti. There was no door. Above me, the familiar silhouette of the mall loomed against the cloudy Melbourne sky, a silent, sleeping behemoth. I didn't wait to see if it would wake up. I ran. Underscore 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 underscore. It has been 6 months. I live in Adelaide now. I work from home, a data entry job that is blessedly, mind-numbingly digital. I do not enter large buildings. Supermarkets are an ordeal. I avoid crowds. My apartment is on the ground floor, with 2 separate exits. I am free, but I am not whole. The contagion left a scar not on my body, but on my perception of reality itself. I am forever the man checking for the seams in the world. I notice things. The way a crack in the pavement seems to have shifted overnight. The strange, looping path a pigeon takes in the park. The way the hum of the refrigerator sometimes changes pitch for no reason. I escaped the Eastgate Galleria, but I can never truly leave. It taught me that reality is a consensus, a pattern that can be hacked. Sometimes, when the wind is blowing from the right direction, I think I can hear a faint, tinny melody. A jaunty, unrecognizable polka. And I have to remind myself to keep walking, to keep breaking the pattern, just in case the walls of this new, larger world ever decide to rearrange themselves around me. The quiet contagion, he doesn't blink anymore. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The first time I noticed it was with David. David sat opposite me in the open-plan tundra of Innovatech Solutions, Austin's fifth fastest-growing B2B logistics synergy startup. Our lives were metronomes of keystrokes and the low, constant hum of the HVAC system, a sound I'd learned to tune out like my own breathing. David was, for all intents and purposes, a human screensaver, pleasant, predictable, and utterly background. He had a wife, 2 kids in Round Rock, and a penchant for wearing polo shirts in colors like sun-faded coral and existential teal. On a Tuesday, under the unforgiving glare of the fluorescent panels, I looked up from a line of buggy code and saw him staring. Not at me, but at his monitor. This wasn't the focused stare of a programmer deep in the flow, this was the inert, absolute stillness of a photograph. His eyes, a mild hazel, were wide and fixed. His face was set in that default corporate expression, a faint, non-committal smile. I watched him for a full minute. He didn't blink. Not once. My own eyes began to burn in sympathy. I blinked hard, the little splash of moisture a welcome relief. He remained unchanged. Burning the midnight oil, Dave? I asked, my voice too loud in the relative quiet. His head didn't turn, but the smile widened by a millimeter. Just synergizing the workflow, Alex, he said. His voice was normal, but the words felt pre-recorded, like the pleasantries of a customer service bot. He still hadn't blinked. I chalked it up to focus. Or maybe new contacts that didn't dry out. Or caffeine. In the tech world, you could blame almost any behavioral oddity on caffeine. I went back to my code, but a new, dissonant note had been struck in the office symphony. I started counting. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. I got to 347 before our manager, Brenda, called a huddle. David finally broke his silicon stare, swiveling in his chair with a smooth, fluid motion, the smile never leaving his face. Throughout the entire 15-minute meeting, he didn't blink. I started to notice other things. He no longer breathed through his nose. I'd sat opposite him for 2 years, I knew the soft, wheezing sound he made when his allergies flared up, a constant soundtrack to our spring. Now, there was only silence. He breathed, I assumed, through that slightly parted, perpetually smiling mouth. A shallow, almost imperceptible rise and fall of his chest. It was efficient. It was unnerving. I told myself it was stress. My own stress. A big project deadline was looming. I was mainlining coffee and getting 5 hours of sleep a night. Of course I was seeing things. People blink. It's an autonomic function, like a heartbeat. To stop blinking is not a quirk, it's a medical event. Yet David seemed fine. Better than fine, actually. His productivity, according to the weekly metrics Brenda emailed out, had shot up by 30%. A week later, Maria from accounting had it. I passed her in the hallway and gave a customary nod. She beamed at me, a wide, radiant, unblinking smile. Her dark eyes were like polished stones. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I ducked into the men's room and splashed water on my face, staring at my reflection. My own eyes, tired and bloodshot, blinked back at me. Blink. 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 The rhythmic flutter was the most reassuring sensation I'd ever felt. I began to count obsessively. It became my secret tick, a way to map the encroaching strangeness. At my desk, I'd flick my gaze around the office. Chloe, marketing. Blink. Good. Sam, UI/UX, blink. Blink. Normal. David. 0 blinks. Unblinking since last Tuesday. Maria. 0 blinks. The smile is locked in. By the end of the month, there were 5 of them. 5 placid, smiling, unblinking employees at Innovatech. They were polite. They were productive. They never took sick days. They'd glide through the office like perfectly calibrated machines, their conversations clean and concise, devoid of the usual human filler, the ums, the sighs, the awkward pauses. Their stillness was a strange sort of gravity, pulling the energy out of the room. The normal pockets of chatter by the water cooler began to dry up. The air grew quieter, save for the hum of the servers and the relentless, rhythmic clatter of keyboards. My own anxiety was a frantic bird trapped in the sterile quiet. I found myself blinking exaggeratedly, as if to make up for their deficit. I'd pinch the bridge of my nose, rub my tired eyes. Anything to feel the normal, flawed mechanics of my own body. The true moment of panic came not at work, but at my sanctuary, a little independent coffee shop on South Lamar. I ordered my usual cold brew, and the barista, a young woman with a constellation of piercings and normally a sarcastic comment for every customer, simply smiled. She took my order, her movements precise. As she handed me the cup, our eyes met. Hers were wide, blue, and as still as a summer sky. She hadn't blinked the entire time. The contagion wasn't confined to my office. It was leaking. I walked out onto the blistering Austin pavement, the city's familiar slogan, "Keep Austin Weird," mocking me from a faded bumper sticker. This wasn't weird. This was wrong. I looked at the people passing by on the sidewalk, my head snapping back and forth, counting, always counting. Man in a business suit. Blink. Woman with a stroller. Blink. Blink. Teenager on a scooter. Staring straight ahead. Smile. No blink. My city, my vibrant, chaotic, noisy home, was beginning to hold its breath. And I was the only one who seemed to notice. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The world split into 2 categories, the blinkers and the still. This was my new reality. My apartment became a fortress, its drawn blinds a shield against the placid faces I was starting to see everywhere. I bought a small, black Moleskine notebook and began to document everything. Date, October 12th. Location, Innovatech Solutions. Subjects, David, Maria, Kevin, Sales, Aisha, HR, Raj, IT. Blinks per minute, BPM 0. Notes, Raj was normal yesterday. I spoke to him about a server issue. We joked about the Cowboys. This morning, he's still. The smile looks wrong on him, it doesn't reach his eyes. His eyes, they look like glass. My research led me down increasingly strange rabbit holes. I started with WebMD, typing in cessation of blinking, which gave me results for coma patients and rare neurological disorders. Nothing about it being contagious. Then I descended into the fever swamps of the internet, forums dedicated to mass psychogenic illness, shared delusion, mimetic hazards. The theories were wild, sentient advertisements, weaponized frequencies, fungal spores in the AC systems. They all felt insane, yet saner than the alternative, that I was losing my mind. My isolation deepened. I tried to call my sister, Sarah, who lived in Chicago. "Something weird is happening here," I said, my voice low, as if the still could hear me through the phone. "What's up, Alex? You sound stressed." "It's the people. They're changing. They don't blink anymore." A pause. "They don't blink?" "No. And they smile constantly. It's not right." "Alex, have you been sleeping? You know when you get overworked, your anxiety, it can make you see things, right?" Remember that time in college you thought all the squirrels were organized? This is different, Sarah. This is real. Okay, honey. Just, try to get some rest. Maybe take a day off. She meant well, but the conversation left me feeling colder and more alone than before. She was trying to debug me, her broken brother, when the world itself was the corrupted code. At work, the number of still had grown to 30. The office was now a silent hive of hyperproductivity. The blinkers, the few of us left, huddled together in the break room, speaking in whispers. But we never spoke about the real issue. We talked about the weather, sports, weekend plans, loudly, performatively human. We were all pretending not to notice. Maybe they genuinely didn't. Or maybe, like me, they were terrified. I found a potential ally in Chloe, from marketing. I noticed her one afternoon, staring into her compact mirror, blinking deliberately. 1, 2, 3. A look of profound relief on her face. Later, I caught her in the kitchen, her back to me. It's the silence, isn't it? I said softly. She jumped, spinning around. Her eyes were wide with fear, not the vacant stillness of the others. What? The silence. And the staring. You see it too. She looked past me, toward the main office floor where the still tapped away in unison. She nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. I thought I was going crazy, she whispered. It's like a switch flips. Yesterday, Jenny was complaining about her car insurance. Today, she just smiles. We agreed to talk after work. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. I wasn't alone. That evening, we met at a bar on the east side, choosing a dark corner booth. It's not just here, I told her, showing her my notebook, the pages filled with my frantic scrawl, a map of the contagion spread across the city. She stared at it, her knuckles white around her beer glass. What do we do? I don't know. But we know it's real. That's a start. The next day, I walked into the office, my step a little lighter. I looked over to Chloe's desk. She was already there, typing. She looked up as I approached, and the hope in my chest turned to ice. A serene, perfect smile stretched across her face. Her eyes, once filled with shared fear, were now bright, clear, and utterly still. She hadn't blinked. My attempt to connect, to share the burden, had somehow made her vulnerable. Had I infected her with my awareness, only for the anomaly to claim her? The thought was horrifying. Talking about it was dangerous. Acknowledging it was like opening a door and inviting it in. From then on, I kept my head down. I became a ghost in the machine. My world shrank to my monitor, my keyboard, and the reassuring weight of my own eyelids closing and opening. Blink. Blink. That's when I started to notice the secondary anomaly, the red herring that would consume me. The hum. It had always been there, the 60 Hz cycle of the American power grid, the sound of civilization. But now, it seemed different. Lower, more resonant. Sometimes, it felt like it had a rhythm, a subtle pulse just at the edge of hearing. I became obsessed. I bought a cheap EMF meter online and started carrying it with me. In most of the city, it gave a standard reading. But in certain places, near new, strangely featureless cell towers that had sprung up almost overnight, or around the Innovatech building itself, the needle would jump, and the static from the device would resolve into a low, throbbing beat. The hum was strongest around the still. When I'd walk past a cluster of them, the meter would scream. They were resonating with it. Or broadcasting it. My journal entries changed. The blink counts were still there, but they were joined by maps of the city, annotated with EMF readings. I was no longer just an observer of the plague, I was an investigator, chasing a ghost signal through the streets of Austin. It was a tangible quest, something to hold on to while my sanity frayed. One night, I followed a spike in the readings to the Zilker Park area. Under the moonlight, near Barton Springs, one of the new, sleek towers stood silent. At its base, a dozen of the still stood in a loose circle. They weren't talking or interacting. They were just, standing. Facing the tower. Their heads were tilted slightly, their smiles serene in the dim light, as if listening to a beautiful piece of music that I couldn't hear. The hum here was so intense it felt like a pressure against my skin. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't random. This wasn't a sickness. This was organized. This was worship. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The realization that the hum was a signal, a broadcast, changed everything. It wasn't a biological contagion, it was an information-based one. A firmware update for the human brain. The still weren't sick, they were upgraded. They had been streamlined, their messy, inefficient human processes smoothed away, replaced by a clean, quiet connection to something. The hum. This new theory was both terrifying and, in a strange way, clarifying. I wasn't just hiding from glassy-eyed people, I was hiding from a signal that was actively trying to rewrite me. I started wearing noise-canceling headphones whenever I left my apartment, hoping to dampen the frequency. It was a flimsy shield, a psychological placebo, but it was all I had. The still were escalating. Their passivity was evolving into a quiet, coordinated purpose. One morning, I left my apartment to find the welcome mat outside my door had been turned exactly 90 degrees. A small thing, but I hadn't touched it. The next day, a single, perfectly ripe red apple was sitting on top of it. No note. No explanation. Just a silent, sterile offering. They knew where I lived. They knew I was a blinker. My paranoia became a constant, thrumming companion. I started double-checking the locks, wedging a chair under the doorknob at night. I felt their awareness on me even inside my fortress. Sometimes I would look out the peephole and see one of them standing across the street, not looking at my building, but just, present. A smiling sentinel in the Texas heat. My work-from-home requests were repeatedly denied by a smiling, unblinking Brenda via email. We value your in-person contributions to the team synergy, Alex. Your presence is essential. They wanted me there. In the heart of the signal. Desperate, I remembered the woman from the library, the one I'd seen furtively counting blinks weeks ago. A long shot. I had no idea who she was, but I had a starting point. I spent 3 days haunting the central library, nursing cold coffees, scanning every face, my own eyes burning from the strain. On the third day, I saw her. She was tucked away in the non-fiction stacks, a book on urban planning open in front of her, though she was watching the library patrons over the top of it. I approached cautiously. "Do you hear the hum?" I whispered, not even bothering with a greeting. She looked up, her eyes, startlingly green and full of a familiar, hunted intelligence, widening. She didn't speak, just slammed her book shut, grabbed her bag, and walked quickly towards the exit. I followed at a distance. She led me on a winding path through downtown, clearly checking if she was being followed, before finally ducking into an alley. I slipped in after her. She had her back to the wall, a can of pepper spray in her hand. "Who are you?" "My name is Alex. I work at Innovatech." "I see them too. I count the blinks." The tension in her shoulders eased, but only slightly. "Lena," she said. "I was an audio engineer." She gestured vaguely. "Before." Over the next week, Lena became my co-conspirator. She was brilliant, methodical, and just as terrified as I was. She had her own theories. She believed the hum wasn't just a signal, but a carrier wave for complex data. "They're not just standing there, Alex," she said, pointing to a diagram she'd drawn of the tower at Zilker. "They're nodes in a network. They're processing something. Look at their placement. It's like a biological server farm. Together, We mapped the signal across the city. Lena, with her engineer's knowledge, was able to pinpoint the broadcast's frequency range. It was an unusual, low-frequency wave that could easily penetrate concrete and bone. Our noise-canceling headphones were, as I suspected, useless. Our alliance was a brief, bright candle in the suffocating darkness. We shared notes, theories, and the simple, profound relief of not being alone. But the contagion was patient. We were tracking a signal spike near the university campus when I noticed a change in Lena. She grew quiet, her frantic energy replaced by a deep calm. She stopped talking about escaping the city and started talking about the hum itself. "It's actually beautiful, in a way," she said one afternoon, her head tilted. "So pure. No distortion. Perfect sine wave." "Lena, that's the signal talking," I said, a spike of fear piercing my focus. "It's trying to get in." "No, you don't understand the elegance of it," she insisted, a faint, dreamy smile touching her lips. "It's logical. An end to all the noise." The next time we met, I saw it. Her blinking had slowed. The frantic, intelligent light in her green eyes was dimming, being replaced by a placid sheen. The smile was no longer dreamy, it was becoming fixed. "I think I'm going to go listen for a while," she said, her voice smooth and even. "Near the tower on Guadalupe. The reception is so clear there." I grabbed her arm. "Lena, no. Don't. We have to fight it." She looked at my hand on her arm with disinterest, then met my gaze. She didn't blink. "Why would you want to fight perfection, Alex?" She pulled her arm away gently and walked off. Not looking back. I watched her go, another soldier lost to the silent, smiling army. The horror of it was absolute. I wasn't just isolated again, I had been given hope and had it surgically removed. I fled back to my apartment, the hum in my ears now sounding like mocking laughter. My last ally was gone. I was alone with my notebook, my EMF meter, and the terrifying knowledge that this thing, whatever it was, wasn't just changing people. It was seducing them. It offered a release from the chaos of being human, a promise of serene, simple purpose. And I was beginning to understand how tempting that offer could be. The constant fear, the anxiety, the loneliness, the hum promised to wash it all away. All I had to do was stop fighting. All I had to do was stop blinking. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The city had fallen. Not with a bang, but with a smile. Austin was a diorama of its former self, populated by placid, efficient humanoids. The traffic flowed with an eerie perfection, no horns, no road rage. The grocery stores were temples of silent consumption. To be a blinker was to be a glitch in the system, a jarring note of chaos in a world striving for perfect harmony. My supplies were low. Canned soup, stale crackers, and the last of the coffee. Going outside was a calculated risk, a frantic, head-down scuttle from my apartment to the one-corner store still run by a grizzled, chain-smoking man who seemed immune, his perpetual scowl a shield against the creeping serenity. But even he was starting to look tired. The email arrived on a Monday morning. It was from Innovatech HR. Subject: Mandatory building-wide system upgrade. Dear resident of the Castile Apartments. Please be advised that on Wednesday, between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., technicians will require access to your unit to perform a mandatory upgrade to the building's communication and wellness infrastructure. Your cooperation is appreciated for a seamless transition. We're so excited for you to experience the new standard of connected living. There it was. The final notice. They weren't going to wait for me to succumb. They were going to deliver the upgrade to my door. The chair wedged under the knob felt pathetically inadequate. I had 2 days. I could run, flee the city and head for the empty plains of West Texas, hoping the signal had a range limit. Or I could face it. Running felt like a slower death, a life of looking over my shoulder, counting blinks in every dusty town until I was found. If I was going to be erased, I wanted to see the eraser. My target was the first tower I had seen them worshipping, the one near Zilker Park. The source of my local infection. On Tuesday night, under a starless, hazy sky, I left my apartment for the last time. My cat, Bast, wound around my ankles, purring, blissfully unaware. I scratched him behind the ears, a lump forming in my throat. "You'll be fine," I whispered. "You already don't blink much." Walking through the city was a surreal nightmare. The still were out, strolling the clean sidewalks, sitting on park benches, their smiling faces tilted towards the unseen sky. They paid me no mind. I was an anomaly, but not yet a threat. The hum was a physical presence, a bass note that vibrated through the soles of my shoes and up into my teeth. It made my vision swim. The park was quiet. The tower stood in a clearing, a slender, featureless obelisk of dark metal. It was utterly silent, yet it screamed into my bones. Around its base stood 50, maybe 100 of the still. They stood in concentric circles, motionless, their faces bathed in an invisible light, their smiles ecstatic. They were deep in communion. I stumbled forward, my EMF meter shrieking in my pocket. The pressure in my head was immense, a crushing weight. I felt my resolve begin to crumble, my carefully constructed fortress of fear and anxiety starting to dissolve. And then the hum filled my mind. It wasn't just a sound. It was language. It was sensation. It was a torrent of pure, undiluted information that bypassed my ears and flooded my consciousness. It showed me the pointless chaos of my own mind, the anxieties, the regrets, the petty jealousies. The constant, exhausting chatter of the self. It showed me the friction of human interaction, the misunderstandings, the loneliness of being a singular, isolated consciousness trapped in a cage of bone. Then it offered me the alternative. Clarity. Unity. Peace. An end to being alone. It was the most seductive thing I had ever experienced. The signal wasn't conquering humanity, it was offering it a gift. Salvation from the burden of individuality. My body relaxed. The frantic bird in my chest grew still. The thought of fighting it suddenly seemed absurd, like fighting the tide or the sunrise. Why cling to the wreckage when the lifeboat was here? But then, a flicker. A memory. The feeling of my own eyes, dry and tired after a long day, and the sweet, minuscule relief of a single blink. That tiny, inefficient, biological reset. The brief moment of darkness. The flutter of a muscle I'd never had to think about until it was all I had left. It was flawed. It was pointless. It was human. I clung to that sensation like a drowning man to a splinter of wood. I focused all my remaining will on that one, tiny action. Blink. The world snapped back into focus for a second, the hum receding to a dull roar. Blink. The pressure lessened. Blink. 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 I was on my knees, clawing at the grass, tears streaming down my face, each blink a defiant gunshot in the perfect silence. I don't know how long I stayed there, fighting a war inside my own skull. Eventually, the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The still around the tower lowered their heads in unison and began to disperse, gliding back into the city to start their productive, serene day. I was left alone in the clearing, exhausted, hollowed out, but still blinking. Underscore 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 underscore. The monitor is dark. A reflection stares back. Calm. Placid. The lines of code on the screen are elegant, clean. The project is finished ahead of schedule. My fingers move across the keyboard with an efficiency I've never known before. The apartment is quiet. Peaceful. The hum is no longer a threat, it is a soothing companion, a constant, reassuring presence. An email dings. It's from David. Subject, welcome. Alex. Great work on the Q4 projections. Flawless. We're so happy you're finally seeing clearly. Welcome to the team. I read the words, and a pleasant, serene smile forms on my face. It feels natural. Correct. I lift a hand to my face, my fingers hovering near my eye. I try to summon the memory, that little muscular twitch, the brief, unnecessary interruption of darkness. What was that called? The word is gone, a ghost on the tip of my tongue. The concept feels alien, inefficient. Why would anyone need to do that? I lower my hand and look back at the screen. There is work to be done. The quiet is perfect. My eyes are open. And I feel no need to close them.